We are meeting about social care.
Right, morning everyone. Sorry for the slightly delayed start. The last meeting I was in ran on slightly. So, are we live? So, in which case we will get cracking. I am Richard Clare, Leader of Wiltshire Council. I chair Cabinet. Before we start, I'm going to ask each of our Cabinet members to introduce themselves. We'll start with Laura this time.
Morning, I'm Councillor Laura Mays. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills.
Good morning, Councillor Dominic Munns. I am Cabinet Member for Waste and Environment.
Morning, I'm Councillor Finnell, the Cabinet Member for Housing.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Ashley O'Neill, Cabinet Member for Governance, IT, Broadband, Digital and Staffing.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jane Davis and I'm the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, SEND and Inclusion.
Nick Bottrell, Cabinet Member for Finance, Strategic Planning and Development Management.
Good morning, Councillor Tamara Ray, Cabinet Member for Transport and Assets.
Good morning, Ian Blair-Pilling. I cover public health, libraries, leisure and communities.
Thank you. If I can ask any other speakers, including members, to introduce themselves when the first time that they come to speak. So I will formally open the meeting, encourage all those watching the live stream to access the agenda and agenda supplement from our website. Apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Holder. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? In which case I'll propose that we adopt them. Have a seconder?
Yep.
Thanks, all in favour? Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Leaders' announcements. I suppose, as it's terribly topical, I should point out that unlike Sir Keir Starmer, Ed Davey, and goodness knows how many other politicians, I have not had any suits bought for me by any donors. Just in case anyone was wondering. Public participation and questions from... Oh, right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't open with levity, clearly you know. People get carried away. Right, public participation and questions from councillors. We have a number of general questions which we will run through now. I am aware I haven't responded to an email that came in earlier today regarding Margaret Wilmot's supplementaries, but yes, that's fine with me, Andrew, when we get to them. Apologies, I've been in meetings since the second I arrived in the building. So I believe the first one we've got was from Councillor Walters, around speed indicator devices. Do we... No, is Councillor Walters with us? No, in which case we don't have supplementaries there. So then we had a question from Margaret Wilmot around cancellation of highways, well, the A303 tunnel scheme. We've had an answer. Did you have a supplementary you wanted to ask on this one?
Yes.
Please come up and if you can sort of introduce yourself. Whether we can give you a clear answer without Nick here, I don't know, but we'll see how we go.
Thank you. I'm Andrew Nicholson. I have a question later. This is a supplementary question I'm asking on behalf of Margaret Wilmot. Her question was about the aftermath for Wiltshire of the cancellation of the A303 National Highways Road Scheme. And she received various fairly general answers, but she wishes me to ask whether the council is prepared, now that National Highways is not the big brother funding all kinds of side improvements and so on, prepared to give special consideration in the area of Amesbury, Stonehenge and that section of the A303, prepared to give special consideration to developing infrastructure for cycling, for walking, and improvements to local bus services and potentially rail services in the vicinity. I understand you can't make a commitment, but are you prepared to give it special consideration?
I mean, I can try and give some clarity. There were clearly schemes around cycle lanes that were being looked at that were going to be funded through this. We need to see whether there are alternative ways of funding that. I certainly think that one of the cycle lanes there, it's a road I have walked up myself on occasions with children. I would, there are some improvements there that would make sense. The idea that we're going to solve problems with the 303 with cycling and walking, given the nature of the transport, is that won't work. Tamara, do you want to comment on rail? I mean, rail just seems like unicorns to me. It's government control, not ours, but...
Yes, so on rail, as you'll be aware, in the north of the county, we were successful with the RYR schemes in Devizes and Corsham, which this government has cancelled. That said, for those schemes, they remain part of our longer term plan, and we will do everything we can to work with the industry. In the south of the county and maintaining those east-west routes, again, we will work with all the rail stakeholders, Network Rail and SWR, to make the case for improvements.
I just one other point I'd add in. When you look at this, I'd still come back to the fact that the problem with the A303, much as we'd like to think it might be solved by other means, it's only going to be solved by doing something to deal with the pinch points along the 303 on such a major transport route. So I am hopeful, no more than hopeful. Government haven't cancelled it, they've postponed it, if you look at the precise language. Whether we will see this come back, they're still fighting the court case, so we don't know what will happen there. We will certainly continue to make the case very strongly to government for the fact that something has got to be done to address what is nationally one of the worst traffic problems on a regular basis, and the impact that then has on a lot of Wiltshire residents on the villages either side of the 303.
Thank you. And the other question on behalf of Margaret is on rail. She'd like to remind you that you still haven't received a report on the Swindon and Wiltshire LEP rail strategy, nor on the Western Gateway Sub-National Transport Body rail strategy, two of the latest in a series going back to the Southwest Area Regional Multimodal Studies, which did advocate improvements to the Salisbury to Exeter line that was single-tracked through Wiltshire. And so she asks, what's the context in which you in Cabinet and you, the Cabinet member, will be receiving reports on these very expensive specialist rail strategy studies?
Thank you. So a key part of the output from the Devizes Gateway study was the commitment from the industry to prepare a Wiltshire-wide rail strategy. We have seen a draft of that and has a number of stakeholders, and comments have gone back to Network Rail, and that will be published in due course.
Thank you.
Thanks. Again, all of this rail stuff, I mean, this is dependent on government and coherent policies. And we've not had, I don't know, when was the last time there was a coherent rail policy in the UK? 1880, maybe? Maybe you can be generous and say sometime in the 1920s, but that was probably the last coherent rail strategy the country's had.
Dr. Beecham was pretty coherent. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. We'll come back to you in a second, Andrew. So, Ian, we've got your questions next. So the first one was around devolution.
Yes, thank you.
So, definitely. That one does consistently play games. Try it again. There we go.
Perfect. Yes, Councillor Ian Thorne, Liberal Democrat Councillor for Carn Central and leader of the Liberal Democrat group. Richard, thank you very much for the response. Very little detail in the response, and maybe you'll help me understand why there's so little detail in the response. I guess my principal point is that the deadline for expressions of interest is the 30th of September, as you say, and yet you're intending to report those interests to Cabinet on the 8th of October. In other words, you already have sent your expressions of interest ahead of that meeting. Would it not have been helpful to have a discussion at Cabinet about those issues before you submit your expressions of interest? And is it not possible, given that these fairly monumental, potentially fairly monumental discussions and debates, which could affect hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, that it would be important to have a more wider discussion before any expression of interest was submitted to government?
I think There are a number of factors here that are important, particularly around context. So, as you will be aware, we've been having discussions with a number of our neighbours. In fact, pretty much all of our neighbours, one way or another, we've had discussions, whether informally or informally. We have agreements that with some of those neighbours that we're not going to be, no one is now going to be individually saying anything, that we will be making sure that anything that comes out is coming from everyone involved. We don't yet know what combined positions are there. The expressions of interest are incredibly vague from government, incredibly vague. They basically say, tell us roughly what you want. We are hearing that actually there seems to be a much greater degree of clarity coming out from government in what they want. So you will have doubtless seen that the Norfolk and Suffolk devolution deals have been pulled on a number of reasons, but one of them being they're not large enough. We're hearing informally that devolution should now look at footprints of about 2 million people. We're also hearing informally that mayors are pretty much the only option. We're being told you can still have a combined authority, but other councils across the country are hearing that you're really going to end up with a mayor. So we need to put in our own view as to what is best for Wiltshire, but I think we need to be doing that in cognizant of the fact that we are likely to see government saying, actually, this is the footprint that we want to see devolution working on, and it may or may not coalesce with whatever view we and the other councils we're talking to have. I'm very happy to brief you and other members offline, because I've got an agreement with the leaders of the other councils. We're not going to say anything in public till we've gone through a process, and I think it's later this week where we're all collating the views of the cabinets of different councils. I really don't want to do them the disservice or disrespect them by putting our views out there until we've been through that collective position. But I'm very happy to talk that through with you and other members to explain the position as far as our current thinking goes. And once we get to the point of interest going in again, I'll be able to make sure we have something back to Cabinet next month to explain that position when we've had a chance to understand what all the other councils are thinking, and we've all agreed either a combined approach, or if we don't agree, we've agreed to disagree.
Yeah, Richard, thank you for that. I suppose, in addition to the October Cabinet meeting, this must come before, probably on more than one occasion, for Council, I would guess, given, again, the significance of any decisions that are taken. You raised the point of the Greater Norfolk arrangement. What I think was interesting about that was how quickly government responded to that particular submission, as you say, negatively, but nonetheless, it would appear the government are quite keen to move quite quickly. And I suppose my overriding concern is that whatever the outcome, and an awful lot of this is being, of course, pushed down from government, that members of Wiltshire Council, as well as other councils, are fully engaged, fully involved. And as far as possible, residents and council taxpayers are as well, because the danger is that, and this certainly won't be the case, but nonetheless, the perception of decisions made in smoke-filled rooms, either in county halls or at Whitehall, I think will become very, very powerful. And I think that we need to try and avoid that at all costs.
I would agree with you. I mean, the Norfolk-Suffolk deals, they've been on the cards for a couple of years. The new government has pulled them because they don't I mean, they were literally to be signed off this week. The new government has pulled them because it has said that they don't conform to their emerging vision for devolution. But we don't know what their emerging vision is. We've only got that sort of smoke and mirrors kind of signals coming out, which is a very frustrating position to be in. Anything that that government eventually said might be a viable option for Wiltshire would need to be properly consulted on, and it would require, my understanding is, unless government change it, it would require approval of all of the authorities involved at their full council meetings. And we've seen with Cornwall what happened where, unwisely, a devolution deal was pushed forward that didn't meet with public approval and didn't meet the approval of the councillors, and it collapsed as a result. So no, I mean, my problem right now is I've no idea what we are realistically looking at, because government won't tell us, and we don't have clarity from other partners as to what extent we may or may not be working together.
Richard, thank you for that. A briefing would be appreciated, I think. Thank you.
Although it does have to be done under Part 2 basis until we get past next week, but I'm very happy to do that. Right, we then move on to your second question.
Yes, thank you very much for, I'm looking at Nick, I think, aren't I, for my NPPF response. The only question I've got actually is in relation to our draft local plan and how confident we are that the draft local plan that's taken months, years to draft and deliver so far will be robust enough to survive whatever comes out of the MPPF housing allocations debate. I guess my worry is that we'll get to an examination. I'm sure I shouldn't be worrying, Nick, you'll calm me down here, but I'm sure my concern is that we get to an examination next year and the inspector says, well, it's 5 years, 5-year housing supply, and your numbers aren't large enough to reflect government policy. So if you can reassure me that's not going to happen, that would be very, very helpful.
There is uncertainty in all things, particularly when the shape, everything's changing around you. But as far as we know at this moment in time, if our local plan is submitted for inspection within 1 month of the government's response to the MPPF consultation, then it will be judged on the basis of the allocations that are there. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we're absolved from having to worry about the increases. We would have, I think, there's some debate about this, but it looks as if we would have 18 months to work out something to do with increased allocations or new allocations to meet the raised indicative totals. And I just think it's worth saying a few things about those. So, this starts from the fact that the government have increased the total number of homes that are expected to be built. I believe that they're not the only ones proposing that that's something that your party also proposed in the election.
Sorry, you're going to need to use your microphone.
Wasn't quite as large.
I think the Conservatives had a pretty large target.
Well, all right, before you carry on, Ian, we'll give clarity. You've raised the question. The Conservatives have a target of 300.
It wasn't a party political point I was trying to make.
You've made the point.
You have now introduced a party political point.
Ian, you've made the point. We'll give you clarity. The Conservative Party had a target of 300,000 a year. The Liberal Democrats had a target, I believe, of 380,000. Labour had a target of 300,000, but has settled on, I think, 370,000. So that's the reality, just in case anyone's wondering.
Yeah. And forgive me for making political points, because I thought we were a political organisation. But anyway, so that's the start of this. But then, of course, there is this somewhat perverse reallocation of housing targets between urban areas like London in favour of places like Wiltshire. So the result being that our notional target is increased by 81% to 3,750 new homes per year. And I just question how deliverable in any scenario is that without some sort of massive increase in the capacity of construction companies and developers to build, without the upending of the dynamics of the housing market in this area, because most developers will tell you that 2,000 or thereabouts additional new homes is about all the market will bear. How deliverable is this? We already have 19,000 homes with planning permission, which developers are not developing. How realistic is this? So you ask for certainty. I can give you the certainty of around the things that I do know, but these are big unknowns, and how they will play out, we cannot say.
Can I come back on that? I mean, the certainty I was hoping to understand was around the progress of the local plan rather than the Labour government's housing figures. But I don't disagree. The fundamental weaknesses around in so many areas, whether it's around training, whether it's raw materials, whether it's the dominating nature of 3 or 4 major high volume house builders, which creates its own problems in terms of delivering numbers. I think there are, I'm not going to call them insurmountable problems, but there are significant, let's call them market weaknesses, which makes that figure very, very hard to deliver. So I don't think we're a million miles apart in respect of our nervousness about whether it is physically possible, as well as the market, as you say, whether there is a marketplace that can absorb that sort of number. But if I may, my second point comes back to, and it's again a local plan related question, and that is that we currently have, as I understand it, from the recent appeal, a land supply of about 3.8 years. And I guess the obvious question in relation to the threat of more unwanted development, further expensive planning appeals, is what we can do as an authority to at least get ourselves back to 4 years, if not to try and struggle our way all the way up to 5 years. So Nick, what can we do about giving ourselves more protection from unwanted and unplanned planning applications?
Without 5 years, it doesn't really matter because the government have removed the 4-year issue. So I mean, you've got to get back to 5 years. I don't think it is possible to get back to 5 years because, as I've just said, there are 19,000 or just short of potential homes with planning permission which are not being developed. That in itself is almost a 10-year land supply, never mind a 5-year land supply. What we've seen, of course, and the land supply figure was calculated on the basis of information back at the reference date is 1st of April 2024, but of course it does include the activity that's taken place from 1st of April 23 and what is projected by the developers to take place up to 1st of April 2028. It is that latter 4 years which of course is collapsing. And why is it collapsing? Well, because they stopped progressing developments when interest rates went up. People who, even windfall is not happening at the same rate because there was, a serious sort of reduction in all development activity. And that's why, and literally every time you test this, I suspect you'll get a lower figure at the moment, because that is, we are not, it's called Wiltshire's housing land supply, and Wiltshire can not demonstrate a sufficiency. It's nothing to do with Wiltshire. We've given the planning permissions for double that number of houses. This is to do with the developer's planned activity over the next 4 years.
I think it's worth reiterating the point. I do not see there is any way for a council that has very little greenbelt, just primarily open countryside greenfield, to maintain a 5-year or a 4-year land supply in the way that the current system works. And one of my major criticisms of the NPPF reforms are that they completely undermine plan-led development because of the reliance on 5-year land supply and the tilted balance. We had, 7-8 months ago, a land supply of about 4.6, 4.7 years, according to the appeal. So the numbers might be slightly wrong, but it was broadly in that region. Remarkably, as of 2 weeks ago, our land supply is suddenly 3.82 years, despite more planning permissions being in existence. This is a game that developers can manipulate to ensure that they are deciding where to develop based on appeal and not councils based on plan-led development. I have never had a problem with us building the houses we are required to build in and by government through a local plan-led process. The problem is we simply don't have the ability to do that because developers come in and say, oh, this won't be developed, this won't be developed. We have a site not very far down the road here with 2,400 houses that still isn't signed off. I was last assured by the developer in a meeting that it would be done by, April, May? Absolutely categorically assured. It's a game. And it's a game where I'm afraid successive governments mean that we have virtually no cards to play. And it's a point that we are making very strongly to government in this consultation process. And I think that's really important. The fact that we have, and I believe it's 18, or it was as of 2 weeks ago, and the number changes all the time, 18,832 planning permissions that could be built, and remarkably, remarkably, 53% of them suddenly can't be built, which just brings us down to 3.8 years. It's a total game.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you are completely right. What is so depressing is it took several years to persuade the last government that the 5-year land supply was a flawed metric. And, you know, a lot of hard work went into that and a lot of sort of arguing, but it appears there's no institutional sort of passporting of knowledge. New government comes in, asks the civil servants what it needs to do to increase the number of homes, because it wants to do that. And of course, the Manila folders come out again, dusted down with the same old failed, you know, theoretical nonsense that leads to the end of plan-led development, basically, as Richard says.
I will bring you back in, but the other thing to note is that in the last 2 years, we've delivered, I think, an average of 2,400 houses a year, despite a 5-year land supply target of the 4-year land supply of 1,900 a year. So despite all of this, these developers saying these properties can't possibly be developed, miraculously, they're delivering 500 over target. It's an absolute farce. Anyway.
Well, I suppose your point about civil servants and governments having no collective knowledge, well, there's nothing new about that. That just happens, and sadly and unfortunately. And the broader picture that you describe, which again I don't disagree with, and there has to be a mechanism at some point, but this will be quite controversial in terms of how, this requires central government, of course, in terms of how you, should we just say, encourage house builders to start to implement consents. And I appreciate there are issues in terms of viability, the economy and so forth, and we'd probably spend our lives in the courts over it. But I do think there's an issue in terms of the number of plots that are consented and how few of those in relative terms come forward. So I wouldn't disagree with that. There's a broader issue while we're talking about the very broader issues, and that of course is relying on essentially an economic activity, which is selling private houses to fund an awful lot of, well, virtually all of our social housing, a lot of our infrastructure, whether it's health, transport, whatever the case may be. So I don't I don't think we're on a different page in terms of the challenges. And it's just the nature, I think, of local government that central government, again, this doesn't change from party to party, are seen to be doing the dirty work, or at least being responsible for doing the dirty work. So my final question is back to the local plan, is, and I take your point particularly about the 2,000 unit site at Trowbridge, which was a key part of the local plan that we're working with currently. Is there anything in terms of our draft local plan that, in a sense, practically reflects on the experiences of the current local plan? In other words, have we done anything differently which might allow us a stronger housing supply? In other words, larger numbers of smaller sites rather than small numbers of larger sites, for example. And maybe that's being naive, and you'll tell me, of course you will, if I am being naive. But I just wonder if there are lessons that have been learned in terms of, using another metaphor, not enough eggs in your basket, so to speak. Nick.
Well, I mean, I get the impression there are a larger number of small sites, but I haven't done the number crunching on that. So you could argue, I suppose, that there might be theoretically more deliverability out of smaller sites than there would be out of very large Ashton Park type, you know, mainly one dominant developer. Yeah, you could argue that. Look, I think the key is, though, that there is a total, not total difference, but there is a big difference between what we as representatives of the community want to see developed, plan-led development, and there's so much evidence that if you get a development which is well planned, well thought out, actually the public can be very more supportive than they are at the moment. And you know, you don't have to go to sort of the Poundbury or places like that to see this. That people will actually get behind it. And so we want, you know, actually we want to improve, or wanted to improve the plan-led aspects of what we're doing. We wanted to move away from this sort of a field here and a field there and a road just going into the estate and coming out the same, the same way. Rather sterile type sorts of developments. But of course, that is what developers want to develop. That's the difference, So you've got these two sort of opposites, and I'm quite certain that if we'd have just, created a plan that had a lot of speculative, high-value fields, and not thought about it in a more planned way, we would probably find that the developers could be keener to roll them out. I mean, you've still got the problem at the moment that they're waiting for interest rates to come down and the market to be more propitious for them. But you would probably find that in an ideal world they would be more keen to go for those sites. But that's not what we want. That's not what our people want. And so at the end of the day, we are going to try and get the best overall solution for our residents. But that might just mean that the developers, they will say, and they'll use the 5-year land supply, of course, or the deficit. They'll say, we don't like that. We'll go there because that's where we can maximise our value.
Okay, you need to please use your mic, and I'm.
No, I'm happy for us to move on.
Yeah,
I
think
think we've had a good crack
Yeah,
at it, so I'm
as
sure we will again.
Much as I would love to continue discussing national planning policy,
No,
and
I'm
the
happy with that. It's fine. Thank you.
less than functional nature of it. The only way we could have I mean, I've spoken to a lot of other councils. The only one I've heard who feels confident around 5-year land supply is because they've gotten something like an 8-year land supply because they've massively over-provided. But if you over-provide, that simply accelerates house building because government will expect you to continually over-provide at the rate you've over-provided, which doesn't strike me as smart community cohesive building. We need reform. I think it's fair to say that very few people I've talked to would agree that the reform we're being provided with is functional reform. Oh, no, come on. Right. If we then move on to Andrew, your question. Did you have a supplementary, please?
Thank you, Chair. And on this time round, my questions were on behalf of Wiltshire Climate Alliance. But I want to say this almost as a point of order. Please take nothing that I may say as any comment on the merits or failings of either the Climate Update Report or Wiltshire Council's own climate progress or Wiltshire Council's influence on the county's climate progress as a whole. I'm not here to give you sound bites. But I do want to say that we were given a very useful meeting by Sarah Valdis and the climate team to introduce this update to us last week. Wiltshire Climate Alliance as a group has not read and digested all that large body of detailed material. Apart from anything else, one reason is that our core team has been working hard on a response to the draft national planning policy framework, taking some inspiration from Councillor Kluwer's response, I may say, although we would like to put more emphasis on underutilised as opposed to brownfield sites in towns. So here we are with your climate update. Thank you. We pointed out to the climate team that they'd admitted that you are now halfway from your February 2019 climate resolutions to New Year 2030, the milestone date when your aspiration is for the council to be carbon neutral, the county to be seeking to be carbon neutral. So you are halfway there. And the detailed question I want to raise is what access the council has to data on non-carbon dioxide emissions, and I'm specifically thinking mainly of methane, but also of nitrous oxide, which comes from agriculture, whether it's mainstream or organic. And I'll give you just a little list of the sources of methane: the gas distribution network, gas combustion in our homes and buildings, landfill sites past and present, beef and dairy, cattle and sheep farming on county farms and in the rest of the county, slurry from cattle, and also bogs, wetland, lakes and ponds. What access does the council have currently to greenhouse gas specific data as opposed to carbon dioxide equivalents? I asked 4 little questions. I only have 2 or 3
Let's take them one time.
supplementaries, and this is the first.
Ian, having asked you to put your mic on a couple of times, I have to ask you to turn it off
Beg
now,
your-
otherwise no one
Richard,
else will
I
be
beg
able
your
to turn
pardon.
those on. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, let's tackle landfill first. So we're not sending food waste to landfill. So that rules out a large producer of methane that you may see across the country. We are working with partners across different industries, farming, for example, to understand, and we will collect that data. It's an interesting point. I was pleased that you raised it in the briefing that we had last week, and we will take it away and build that data in where appropriate so that it can help drive our future strategy.
Thank you. I do understand that the government's structure of information, data, climate targets doesn't help you to separate out the greenhouse gases. And so I sympathise with you. We are halfway to 2030, so it's high time that either independently through government or working with industry partners and others, you are able to tell the public, here's our CO2, here's our methane, here's our nitrous oxide. Moving on to my other question, which was more transport related, and please note I mistakenly called it LTP3 in my written question. It's obviously LTP4. I was a bit shocked to see the local plan review transport evidence base described as something aimed at developer interventions. My reading of it is that it's really a working out of detailed transport targets and options based on quantitative greenhouse gas targets, in turn based on the detailed work from the anthesis reports. And so I think it says a lot more that's useful to LTP4 than I seem to read in the question. But I'll just pick one thing. LTP4 is place-led, your response says. Is LTP4 not climate target-led as well? Because if it's not, then the council will be U-turning on the commitment made by Councillor Thomas in February that our transport policy will meet our climate commitments.
So the climate and environment is one of the considerations within our LTP4, which I look forward to bringing to our next cabinet. We live in a rural county. We have some big challenges, and the nature of our rurality is a key consideration, as well as a range of other factors, including health and well-being of our residents and safe communities. So there are a range of objectives that we will be the draft plan looks to address, and I look forward to bringing that to the next cabinet meeting.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just as well for context, the elements of the LTP4 have to support the local plan. So there are elements of that process inside the local plan that are specifically around the issues of development. So an element of it is the phrase that you put at the beginning about the fact that parts of it are geared up to ensure that developers understand what they need to do in the local plan is accurate. That's just a part of the role of LTP4.
Thank you, Councillor. And moving on to my question about my other question about transport. Oh, and this kind of emerges from an earlier answer to Margaret Wilmot's question. The rail strategy is drafted. You say it's gone out to stakeholders. I know of no stakeholders, including rail user groups, Sostrans, walking, cycling groups, who obviously have a very serious stake in railway development, who were consulted. I may be wrong. We'd be glad to help you to contact stakeholders. The question is whether you're willing to issue the draft to them. The other part of the question is this. I think I'll make this briefer than I was going to. Has the council received any indications from government on the outcomes of the M4 to Dorset Coast connectivity study at this point in time? Councillor Clerc shakes his head.
Go on, Tamara, you
I
answer
take the
that.
one on engagement with stakeholders on the draft rail strategy, which, as I said, has been led by Network Rail. There have a number of stakeholders have been involved. In fact, behind you, Colin Gale was putting his hand up, representing the Pusey Rail user group, and other stakeholders in the county have been involved from the outset. In fact, Colin, you were involved with the devices project from a very early stage, weren't you? So, yes, happy to share more detail on that as we go forward. And in fact, Andrew, I do owe you an email to set up a meeting, which I will be doing. I was on holiday last week, as you may know. On the Dorset to M4 study, as I think Richard was shaking his head as to say that there's been no further update, and that has been in abeyance for some time.
I have to be honest, I'm starting to equate it in my own mind with a Game of Thrones. It's a work of fiction that we'll never see the final chapter of. I hope I can be, I'll be wrong in both cases, but hey.
Thank you very much, and hopefully there'll still be ships coming into Poole Harbour when it's published. I just wanted to one little piece of clarity. You mentioned in the response DFT guidelines on the environmental and carbon implications of the A350's proposed schemes. I wasn't sure what guidelines those were, but I could easily go offline and ask you for clarification on that.
I think we'd have
way to approach
to take
it.
that one offline, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our questions. So if we then come on to the agenda itself, the first item is Q1 revenue budget monitoring. Nick, over to you.
Bear with me a second. I've just put the wrong password in. So of course it takes 10 minutes to tell you it's the wrong password. Whereas, right. Okay. So I mean, I think the first thing that that I want to say here is, I said this at overview and scrutiny the other day, is we don't, you know, we do not want to start Q1 forecast with a variance showing of £8.3 million. That is not an ideal situation. We fully, you know, accept that up front. Three things, I guess, that I just want to say in explanation, in supplying further detail. Let's put it in perspective, first of all. So we are talking about something which is 1.5% of net budget. And there will be a lot of authorities up and down this country, because we've already seen a lot of their published forecasts for the year based on Q1, who will give their eye teeth to be forecasting 98.5% on budget. It's not to say, of course, that I'm not taking the matter seriously. As I said, started off by saying, I do take it very seriously. The other point I would also, you know, gently remind Cabinet of is the fact that we have been here before quite often in recent memory, and even last year, which of course had a very favourable outcome, a very favourable outturn. We were projecting an overspend in the people area, and you know, not quite at the levels that we are this time round, but nonetheless, it's happened before. This is not something we're not that we're not unused to dealing with. And I guess the third question, before anyone else asked it, is what are we going to do about it? You know, what is actually the actions that we're going to take? I'm clear that this is not something that we want to end the year from. We don't want to spend. We've got adequate reserves, but we don't want to spend them in plugging gaps like this. And you know, we have had some track record of closing overspends from management actions, and that's just what we're going to do this time round as well. There's always areas that are under stress financially, and there's areas which are either less stressed or actually doing okay. And there is the dynamics across the board, but we operate as a whole, taking into account all of that. So I'm advised by officers that measures will be put in place, that these areas of overspend will be addressed and brought back as much as possible into line. And those areas where, of course, we're okay, will be, solidified and enhanced as much as we possibly can. And in that way, we can bring together the whole to ensure that a satisfactory outcome for the year is achieved yet again, as it was last year. That's what we're aiming to do, and that's what we will do. And we are determined to maintain the financial stability of this organisation, because quite frankly, if we don't have that, we can't do anything else. We have to be, it's not just a nice to have, it's a prerequisite of what we are doing in administration of this council. And we're not going to lose that reputation. We're going to end the year in a good place. So with that sort of introduction and an explanation, I'll put it to Cabinet.
I'll open it up to Cabinet in a second. If I just provide some of my observations. We're invariably, pretty much invariably, I'm not sure I recall any Q1 where we were not forecasting some form of overspend. We've never failed to deliver a balanced budget at the end of the year. If you look at the breakdown, the line that concerns me is adult services. That's where you've got the most significant degree of overspend. If it were not for the adult services line and we were looking at a 1 or 2 million, I wouldn't be. It would be pretty much business as normal, and I would have confidence that it would be relatively easy from an officer point of view to bring that under control. One of the reasons I was slightly late in is we were having a meeting this morning where we are looking in detail at understanding what is going on with the adults budget and making sure that all appropriate steps are being taken, because that needs to be done, because that's a significant element of overspend. It's always helpful, I think, to get context and to get a sense check as to what the rest of the sector is doing. If you look at neighbouring authorities, everyone is reporting overspends at this point in the year of those who've reported. Some haven't reported yet. And actually our forecast overspend is lower than any of our neighbours that I could find. I don't actually take any comfort in that, but I do take a sense check that the same pressures, particularly in adult social care, are hitting the whole sector. And that's worth noting. Beyond that, I've been very clear to officers that we need to, as normal, bring in a balanced budget. There's a very clear expectation, because the adult number is higher than we would have expected in certainly the last 3 years of doing this. Steps are being taken with a degree of urgency. I have no doubt that if these figures were run again right now, we would already be seeing an improvement, and I have no doubt that improvement will continue. Happy to go into any detail if anyone wants, but open it up to Cabinet members if there's anything that anyone on Cabinet wants to add. As you can imagine, we've discussed this in quite some detail. Everything stems from good finances. So, right, if I then move on, I've got to get clarity in the order, because the order seems to have changed from the order I tend to run things in on my notes. Right, I'm going to stick in. We'll bring ONS in first from a scrutiny perspective, and then you. So, if I ask Chris and/or Pip for any comments you've got. Chris first, as Vice Chair of ONS.
Thank you, and Graham sends his apologies and asked me to make the following statement on his behalf. So, if you bear with me, I will read this out. As you'd expect, ONS Management Committee's debate focused on the forecast overspend in adult social care, with this representing the large part of the overspend overall. Members were concerned at the forecast, but did note that management actions are being taken to address it and to establish the cause of it, whether that be issues with the forecasting of the demand or cost when the budget was originally set. or extraordinary and unforeseeable demand. In view of this issue, the Chair of OSMC has asked the Chairs of Financial Planning Task Group and Health Select Committee to monitor the financial and service implications respectively in the coming months, as well as OSMC continue to receive these revenue budget updates, of course. So a brief statement from Graham there. I'd like to hand over now to Pip to go into it in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Pip.
Thank you. Good morning. The Financial Planning Task Group did an awful lot of work on Friday. Very grateful that Emma did come along and explain the difficulties in adult social care, which are just going lack of funding to pay for the care, which is increasing and increasing, and an increasing number of clients, but she's much more articulate than me in explaining it. But we looked at numerous things: adult social care, obviously, dedicated schools budget, planning underspend and overspend, medium-term financial strategy, effect if we have, it's all down to the government and whether we stay with high interest or whether inflation increases again. So we could need extra borrowing. Waste services, chief exec services, corporate expenditure, staff vacancy management, savings. Only the red savings were included in Q1. By the time we get the half year, the amber savings will be included as well. So that's a risk. And then we looked at the capital and the financial implications, as I said, of borrowing. And Stone Circle, as you are aware, was dealt by a separate task group, and you saw, Chair, the report on that on Thursday last week. I have pages and pages and pages. I've given a copy of this to the Cabinet member, and also I gave a copy to Councillor Thorne because he was unable to attend on Friday, and I didn't want him asking you the same questions that we dealt with. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Excellent. No, there was one thing you said that I was going to come back on, but actually I don't think I need to. I think it was clear. Sorry, that's why I'm pausing. Ian, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Richard, and thanks to Chris and Pip for your fantastic work on scrutiny. And I really enjoyed being a substitute at ONS on Thursday. I thought that was a very, very, very good discussion. Thank you for Nick to almost rose and applauded him at the end of a sort of valedictory speech, grasping, I was going to say defeat out the jaws of victory, but I'll be more generous and say victory out the jaws of defeat. I think my judgment is that, as many other people have said so far, we've been here before. This is nothing new. And quite bluntly, given where the vast majority of the overspend is bluntly a reflection of the exponential challenges that we face around funding adult social care. And again, it's back to some of the discussions earlier about local government being expected to pick up, well, I was going to say the slack, but there is no slack to pick up, but nonetheless, the extraordinary challenges of our demographic shift, both in terms of our national demographics and, of course, the nature of Wiltshire, people moving to Wiltshire, retiring to Wiltshire, which in many ways is a fantastic thing in terms of the energy that young retired people bring, but it brings its same challenges as well. So it is a cause of concern, but it's not something that I think one would get particularly panicked about. And I was tremendously reassured by the, I'll get it right this time, the Section 151 officer. I did look up what 141 was the other day, which is completely unrelated to what you do, Lizzie. But nonetheless, I was reassured by what I heard from the Section 151 officer. And I'm just wondering, as appropriate, whether Lizzie can say any more about the conversations that have taken place, just to provide that additional reassurance that we are moving into a more comfortable position. The other question I have got, which is will be evidently a non-accounting question, and that it always seems to me that the most accurate quarter of the year ought to be quarter one, in the sense it's the closest moment to when the budgets were set. And therefore, as you get through quarters 2, 3 and 4, events, dear boy, etc., you find yourself with all sorts of events and situations that may have been impossible to prejudge. So I just welcome a view as to whether that's the case, that we ought to be much better at predicting at least quarter one. So it's that question, and it's the question in terms of what's been happening since last Thursday to do what we need to do to get us back into balance is probably the word to use. Thank you, Richard. And
I'll
thank
let
you,
Nick start.
Yeah, I'll let the Section 151 officer come in afterwards. But I think the period from setting the budget to actually quarter one is a considerable period. So if you think that, yes, we vote for the budget in February, but actually a lot of the groundwork is done in the autumn of the previous calendar year. So you're talking about, 9-10 months between us talking now and some of those, those figures being put into those budgets, and probably some of the work even longer before. So it's actually quite a long time that, we've had the outturn since then. So we know more. We have to do, the necessity of planning means your budgets are based on information quite early on in the year. And so I think it is quite difficult. That may be one of the reasons. I think there's also a reason why quarter one is generally seems to be our worst. It's not just that, of course, mitigations take place. It's also down to the fact that people are probably their most uncertain at quarter one, so they veer on the pessimistic side rather than the optimistic. When you've got half the year down or 3/4 of the year down, you can be much more optimistic about things, and indeed whether you'll have more evidence whether those things that you're pessimistic about at quarter one have actually happened or not. So I think it obviously becomes a more certain process as you're going through it, but don't underestimate how the sheer period between where we are now and when these figures were laid down and formulated. It's a considerable period of time that's passed. I'm not saying there's any alternative. I'm just saying it. Yeah, I'm marking on it.
I'll bring this in just a second. I mean, in an accountant's world, yes, you would expect Q1 to be perfect. In the real world, it's the quarter with the most uncertainty, and you lose uncertainty over time, which is why the forecast gets better over time. In the world of local government, in any world of government, uncertainty is a massive part of the landscape we have to deal with. Therefore, that uncertainty reduces over time, which is why you're better off being, Lizzie would say, realistic. I would say pessimistic, perhaps, in Q1 and crystallising that certainty over time.
Thanks, Chair. So for those who've missed some of the conversations we've had over the last few working days, in reality, we had overview and scrutiny meeting Thursday and then financial planning task group on Friday. Obviously, £8 million overspend is something that as a council we cannot tolerate. And it is something that management absolutely take ownership of in terms of addressing, implementing actions and those mitigations to contain our spend within our budget. We cannot have an £8 million overspend to be funded by reserves at the end of the year, particularly if those pressures are ongoing. That has an impact on the base budget moving forwards. So there have also been management conversations over the last few working days as well in terms of what those mitigating actions are, and a message sent out to managers this morning in terms of cost control measures. So absolute immediate action in terms of those mitigating actions that have to be taken to address this position. There are many wider conversations in terms of the overall position. What do we need to do? How do we need to represent that? In terms of understanding the pressures that we are seeing in adult services and how do we manage that within our overall budget? It is very foolhardy to understate budgets rolling forwards if you have cost and pressure in those areas. The organisation needs to understand those and then make sure that it is managing other services or within that service deliverability to ensure that we address that position and we're really clear in terms of a balanced budget and a robust budget for those future years as well. So there's many aspects that we all have to consider in terms of the operations and the financial implications of all of those operations as well. So it's quite a complex piece for us, but really critical as we roll into budget setting, that our eyes are wide open and we are representing what is the reality that we see now. And we're really clear then in terms of the scale of the ask that we have in terms of how do we reshape and actions that are taken, savings that may need to be proposed to be able to address that position in the future years' budgets. So hopefully that's enough in terms of part of the conversations we've had over the last few days.
Thank you. Just a quick one, Richard, if I may, and thank you very much for that. Again, it was reassuring to hear you speaking on Thursday morning. My only other question is, notwithstanding what may happen in quarters 2, 3 and 4, I'm just interested to understand this, the 8 million overspend, in terms of the actions that you are seeking and officers and managers are seeking to achieve, is it designed to, again, use a non-accounting phrase, pull back the 8 million by the time we get to quarter 2, or is it the aim to pull the 8 million back over the course of the whole year? Again, recognising there may well be or there may not, but there may be overspends in other quarters. I'm just interested to understand whether the action is about immediate recovery, or as immediate as it can be, or whether it's a recovery that will be planned over the course of 4 quarters. I hope that's a reasonable question to ask you.
I'm happy to answer that. So it's actually a yes to both of those. So we have to take immediate action that will address as much as we possibly can. The reality will be, though, 8 million is a huge task in terms of controlling costs, especially when services are still facing issues in terms of how do they manage demand that is presenting higher than we've budgeted. So there will be aspects that absolutely will get reflected in the Q2 position, but that doesn't mean that that's the end of it for us, particularly where we know that there are ongoing pressures. Some of those mitigations might be one-off. Well, that simply isn't good enough, because we need to make sure that going forwards we have a robust financial position and we can manage within our overall financial quantum. So it is, yes, absolutely immediate action that will be reflected, but also we need to go further to address that longer term position.
Thank you. And also you said about further changes. If every other budget I have seen at Wiltshire Council is anything to go by, there will be movements, good and bad, over the course of the next 9 months. So yes, this is constantly a moving feast. You aim the goal is to have it solved by the end of the year, which is something that we have consistently achieved, and I am confident that we will continue to achieve, unless government throws some massive curveball at us all. But we'll find out about that in due course. Right, thank you. Did anyone else want to come in on this item? No? In which case, if we move to the vote, do you please move the proposals? Don't read them all, they're long, we've all read them.
Moved.
Thank you. All second, all in favour? Thank you. So we then come on to the counterpart, Q1 capital budget monitoring. Nick, over to you again.
Right, okay. So this report sets out the situation with regard to capital spending for the year and the Q1 update. And you might recall, Cabinet might recall, that last financial year, we managed to spend a total of 163 million pounds. That was considerably larger than actually we'd achieved in, I think, probably ever, but certainly in the recent history of the Unitary Authority. And so we went into this year, this financial year, 2024-25, with an agreed spend of 256 million. And I sort of, bear in mind the point that we've just been talking about, that this was formulated at the time of the budget setting exercise. And actually, I think I don't have any notes from that period, but I do seem to remember saying that was a very ambitious target to aim for. And of course, at that time, we hadn't even had the outturn from the year that we were working in, that was taking place at the time. So 9 months on from then, and of course, we are in a better position to adjust the programme. You'll also remember that at the time of the outturn, we added £6 million to the plan. Well, we're now proposing additions of 30 million, both in terms of some new projects and things which have been brought forward. But, big but, we're also proposing to remove £66 million of items that have been put into future years. So the net changes are that we're now looking at a revised capital programme of 226 million. And, well, I'm pretty certain that we're not going to be spending 226 million this year. I think I said at overview and scrutiny, I was going to open a book on somewhere in the region of 170 to 180 million. But then I was reminded that we're not allowed to gamble on these things. So probably I'm not going to open a book. The next updates and reports will undoubtedly see the figure we're now showing come down. And as I say, I think it will be in the 170 to 180 million range. So Cabinet need to bear that in mind. We have had this debate before on capital forecasting and how we're getting better at projecting these things in a more accurate and timely way. And I think that's right. We have done, and but the report here before you does highlight that we still need to further improve our ability to project these sorts of things. There's clearly a cash treasury management issue which comes to the fore, particularly when we're talking about well, not just particularly, actually, whether it's money that we're receiving for external projects, externally funded projects, or whether it's borrowing funded projects. There's still a treasury management function that needs to work hand in glove with our capital programme. And the more accurate the capital programming, then the better more efficient our treasury management function can be. I think it's probably been said before, but it's worth saying worth repeating, there is a difficulty in accruing for projects. So this necessarily tends to, even if expenditure has been billed, if it hasn't been paid, this can cause an under-reporting. And so it goes some way to show why the spending level at 13%, bearing in mind, of course, we've had 25% of the year in Q1. We're talking about some extra sums which will not be in the programme at the end of the year. But even allowing for those, the 13% is probably depressed by this, inability to not fully reflect money that's either just about to be paid or just or is owed. So I think, again, that's an area that we are well aware of, we need to improve on, and I'm assured by officers that indeed we are. So that's the capital programme at this stage of the year. obviously we're happy to take any questions on it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you've highlighted the key issue, which is every time I get Q1, I look at it and think, goodness, why are those figures so low? And then you interrogate it, and it's because we've invoiced, but we haven't yet paid, or the payments haven't yet worked their way through the system, or work hasn't ramped up to start because of the time of year on different projects. So, yeah, hopefully that Financial Planning Task Group have been able to delve into any areas of concern there. Certainly every time we get this side, there are actually, this year I sat on my hands. I didn't ask for Q1, having asked the same questions for I think 3 years running, and I'll make sure at Q2 that the movement's where I'm expecting it, and then ask questions if it isn't at that point. Highways always being the one that I go straight to for obvious reasons. Does anyone else from Cabinet have any comments here? No. Oh, the only other comment I would add is that some of the spend around significant road infrastructure improvements are clearly dependent on government, and there's with a new government a degree of uncertainty there, an even greater degree of uncertainty than we may have had historically on some of those. Chris, if I come to you first.
Thank you. And again, a statement from in Graham's absence. Overview Scrutiny Management Committee had a long agenda last week with several important items, so we had to leave a more detailed scrutiny on this report to our Financial Planning Task Group the following day. However, we noted the update on the capital programme and appreciated the offer from officers to provide a briefing note for all members on the management of phosphates on land and how the council recoups the cost of this from developers. But as I say, I'll hand over now to Pip because we went into great detail on the Friday.
Thank you. Pip.
Thank you. Yes, we did go into it in greater detail than was able for ONS. I think it's difficult for me to understand some of this because local government doesn't accrue. And that would be something that would show up far better if one did. But we can't help the rules that change for different things. Bit worried about new bids are challenged internally to look at need, benefits and value for money. Haven't actually seen any come to be assessed financially. But I'll leave that just to float. Other than that, as I said in my first report, we always look at this very carefully because the implications of borrowing, especially when we don't know what the rates are going to be, and they could be getting worse, not better. And Stone Circle, a separate report was done, which I know you had a look at, Richard, so I won't say anything about that. But other than that, the capital was rigorously looked at, but at this stage, no particular problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Pip. Ian, if I come to you.
Yes, thank you, Richard. I don't think I've got a great deal to say. I mean, it just feels like Groundhog Day, frankly, that we have this conversation every time. And we set ourselves what one could describe as an ambitious target, and then find that reality hits and we're in a slightly different ball game. So I think from what Nick was saying, that we spent, if I made the note correctly, 163 million last year. Not that he's running a book, but that would generate a bit of revenue for Wiltshire Council, Nick, if you did. So perhaps that might be helpful. 170. So I'm not quite sure what the inflation rate is, but in proportionate terms, it's probably about the same, if not less than last year. So I just wonder, we may be satisfied with that, but I just wonder if there are any other learning points. But again, we've had this conversation so many times as to how we can more accurately engage and reflect on these targets. I accept things happen, there are inevitable delays, but that must happen every year. So there's a delay which then pushes it into the following year. Well, we're in this year, it was the following year last year. So I just wonder if there's anything helpful to discuss around how we simply have a slightly more realistic view. I suppose if we're looking at Andy and Lizzie here, if we're assuming we are borrowing less to spend less, that's helpful from a revenue point of view, and that's not too unhelpful at the moment. And I think Pip touched on, I think, a question that I raised on Thursday, which was about phosphates. And again, I would just welcome a note. I'm sure I think we agreed that colleagues would receive a note in terms of, given the investment that we are directing at certain parts of the county in order to seek to mitigate the impact of phosphates and therefore reduce objections from statutory consultees in order to deliver housing, back to our housing discussion, how we then claw some of that, if not all of that money back from the beneficiaries, i.e. the house builders. But I think that's all I want to say at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, I partly take your point. Historically, the capital programme has been has underachieved significantly. We're at a point now where we are achieving a much better success rate because we are being much more rational. There are always factors in there that occur. So in this case, we've got a new government who is changing its view around some highways programmes that mean that spend on the three from our perspective will no longer be happening. You also, this year, we've seen construction costs and building maintenance costs have gone up massively, which has caused big disruption in that industry. And again, that makes it hard to precisely forecast some of this. We're in a much better position than we used to be. We will never be spot on. We should never expect capital expenditure to be the same as last year. That isn't how capital expenditure works. We expect capital expenditure to be relevant to the needs that we've got and the capital that we've got available, most of which comes from grant, but some of which is our own capital. So again, I think that's worth bearing in mind when you're looking at borrowing. So the standard funding that comes in from central government for highways repairs is grant. It's not borrowing, we get it and we spend it. So again, it's a lot more nuanced, I think, than that simple picture. I don't know if you wanted to add anything there, Nick. Okay, did any other member want to, sorry, you do, go on. No? No? Does any other member want to come in on this item? No? So again, Nick, if you can please move the proposals.
Formally moved, Leader.
Thanks, I'll second that. All in favour? Thank you. We then come on to Q1 Corporate Performance and Risk Monitoring Report, the last of our trilogy of regular reports. As I said at Overview and Scrutiny, this is falling into a pretty regular rhythm of reporting now. We've got a couple of tweaks because, again, of changes government have made. So, for example, there are no longer single Ofsted ratings. Therefore, we can no longer report on the number of our schools that meet a single word Ofsted rating. So that will have to change over time, and we will look at how to adjust that. There were some suggestions coming out of Overview and Scrutiny for different metrics. We will take that away and consider some of them, although I am keen to make sure this report as the overview, the top level of a scorecard, doesn't become overly granular. There is a significant amount of detail in terms of other metrics that sit below this that are looked at by cabinet members in conjunction with directors at POBs, but also can be looked at by the various scrutiny committees if they want to look at the detail in an area. I won't run through the entire report. We're already quite some way into the meeting, and I won't prolong it by running through things that I am quite sure you've already read. I will pass on to cabinet members if they have any comments at this stage on their areas. No? Okay, if everyone's happy there. The only other thing to note is that we're also then looking at risk and some details around projects this time. So over to Overview and Scrutiny, please.
Thank you. Again, from Graham. As always, OSMC had a useful discussion on this very broad report. There were questions and debates on issues such as the issuing of education, health and the care plans, repeat referrals to children's social care, Section 42 outcomes, take-up of the NHS health checks, the percentage of care leavers in education, employment or training, electric vehicle charging points, housing register waiting times and staff vacancies in the antisocial behaviour team. Okay, so overview of this is an important task which we do take very seriously, and we look for it, but it, as you said, it is getting simpler as we get a better understanding of the report, I think is the way to put it. So thank you very much indeed for that.
No, thank you. And I think it's really important on the finance topic and on this to make sure that we are getting that scrutiny of the data. This is giving us that top level view of where the cabinet sits, where concerns might be, where things are going particularly well. And it's good to make sure that it is being looked at. All three of these reports are being looked at across the board, not just from a cabinet perspective. Ian, over to you. Did you have any questions or comments here?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I want to start by paying tribute to one of your colleagues. Looking at the stats, Councillor Ian Blair Pilling, congratulations on your figures. I think they are remarkable. I have read the small print in terms of the reconfiguration of numbers in relation to how we count the users of leisure centres, but congratulations overall on the figures that you and officers are achieving. I think it's very important to say that. So you're genuine. I haven't got a punchline, but it's going to come out here genuinely. There's nothing else about to happen, don't worry. But I will come back, and I apologise to Laura because, of course, the first thing you always do is go to the first page, and who's on the first page but Laura and her colleagues. And we've discussed the gaps before, so I've only got one question, which I'm sure was the issue has been on previous reports, but I'm just slightly appalled and fascinated by the distinction between, I'm sure there's a very good reason, particularly around the KS4 educational gap in relation to 5 GCSEs. Why there's such a big gap between maintained and academy schools? Is it purely statistical in the sense that the vast majority of schools providing GCSEs are academies, or is there any other slightly more underlying? I'm not looking for problems, but it just sort of jumped out at me, and I'm just wondering if there's I'm sure there is an answer to that.
Yes, you're right. The most secondary schools are academies, so that's why more children are in academies at secondary level than they are at maintained. Is that the question you're asking?
So my question is that on the KS4, it's the overall figure is 32%, 32.6%, which is the gap between pupils receiving pupil premium and their as we use the term, non-disadvantaged peers achieving 5+ GCSEs, including English and maths. And I'm just wondering why the figure is presumably the maintained and academies, that the maintained schools are also secondary schools. I'm just wondering why there's a distinction, quite a big distinction, between those two figures. If we know why there's a distinction between those two figures.
I really share the frustration about the educational gap here at Key Stage 4, and it's one of the things that, as Lucy will know, and Catherine Davis, is something that is this drum I've been banging for a very long time. So, and I see a lot of plans, and I see a lot of action, and I see a lot of committees that don't seem to be moving the dial. And so, in fact, this afternoon, we are having our first meeting, which is to really drill down into this. We've set up a special school scrutiny group into this because of the fact that we just don't seem to be moving the dial on this, and it's not enough. We've known it's been a priority in our business plan. We're also working on an affordable school strategy because a lot of the issues that come are not just about education, it's about a whole life for that child and what issues that they are having at home. And so we do a lot of work on getting schools to understand how that, how a child turning up to school, do they have the right uniform, all those sorts of things. If a family can't afford those things, that is how life can continue to be hard for that child. So on the one hand, there's the academic achievement, but on the other, there is the whole life and looking at that to see how we can help. If you have a parent who can't read, what effect does that have on the family and the outcomes for that child? And we're launching a new educational disadvantage charter this September through the Wiltshire Learning Alliance to get schools to sign up for this, because one of the issues, and I'll be quite blunt about this, is there are some schools that won't accept children who they know are going to bring down their performance targets. And a lot of the work that particularly Catherine David has done, is working with those schools to say it's not acceptable to say that this child, you can't meet this child's needs when you can. They may affect your overall results, but that's not going to be good enough. And one of the things I really approve of the new Ofsted inspection framework, it will be looking at that, making sure that the inclusivity of schools, because it's easy for them to say we're doing a good job, but if you're excluding children right at the beginning, you're not doing a good job for every child. So it is a whole mix, and it's very complex. And incredibly frustrating that we're not making the progress that we should be on this.
And to answer the other part of your question, I'd love to look at that data and think that means maintained schools are so much better. It's a sample size issue. We've got 4 maintained schools and all the rest are academies. So when you're dealing with a small sample, it distorts data. And that's a really big warning whenever we're looking at data like this, is make sure you understand or make sure that I ask Catherine to explain whether we can draw that degree of statistical relevance from it or not. The overall figure we can't really argue with, but with 4 schools, one good one distorts it completely. And with, 28 academy schools, 2 good schools won't distort that in the same way.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Lord.
Anything else that you wanted to raise? No, that's Thank you. Do we have anything from any other members? Yeah, please. You'll need to log yourself in.
Worked?
Yeah, that
worked. Thank you, Chairman. Two points. I'd like to take you to page 117 on the score sheet. And the first simply is that there's a subheading hidden in the grey bar reading road safety. I just draw to your attention that the rows below do not relate to road safety. Now, I speak as a councillor in the southwest area of Wiltshire, where we are very exercised on the topic of road safety. As you may or may not be aware, the number of, over a 3-year period, the number of incidents of people killed or seriously injured in the roads in southwest Wiltshire is significantly higher than in any other of the community areas in Wiltshire. 50% higher than in Chippenham, which is the next highest, and 3 times as high as in the south of Wiltshire to our east. So I do believe that your score chart ought to have, and you ought to be registering road safety as a serious issue here in Wiltshire. It's a serious issue to us in the southwest. And the rows below relate to roads maintenance, highways maintenance, but not to safety. Now, may I go on with my second point?
Well,
Do you want to come in?
Let's respond to that one first, and then bring in your second. We had when we first set this up, there's an awful lot of data you can look at, and that statistical relevance of data, where you're dealing with what are fortunately now across the UK comparatively lower numbers of highways deaths certainly than they used to be. It means that you can see a lot of distortions in data. So when we were looking at trying to come up with a guide to give us an overview of how things are going across the county as a whole, when we looked at that and we thought, actually, that's something that if someone wants to get into more granular detail, it can be there, but it's not a particularly good proxy because it can move massively with very small changes, albeit incredibly significant ones to people involved with a serious injury or fatality. So P1 potholes are certainly considered to be a safety issue. They're a safety defect. That's why they're repaired inside 24 hours. That's why they're the metric we put there. We've added in the P2 and P3 potholes at the request of scrutiny. I would agree that they're not necessarily the same relevance from a safety point of view, but they're definitely an issue in terms of the quality of our roads. And then the speeding is a major factor in road safety. So the fact we've got speed watch in there again, I would say is a safety issue, because that's understanding both speeding and the extent to which speeding is being tackled. So I take your point to an extent. I think this is something, if you want to get to that degree of granularity, particularly on an area board area, it's something that I would urge that Environment Select look at. I'm not sure that it would be a useful a useful point for that overview of the state of play of the entire county. But I do agree that there's going to be some useful data in that granular level that can be drilled into to try and deal with specific issues, yes.
Chairman, the evidence in the southwest of Wiltshire is quite clear. The deaths and serious injuries take place on the major roads, the major routes, the single carriageway, national speed limited roads, the A303, the A350, the A30. These are not roads where speed watch teams are operating. The principal problem is speed and what you can do to enforce speed limits and to deter people from driving recklessly. Not only in the national speed limited areas, I should say that in some cases in areas where there are local limits. One speed indicator device in Donhead St Mary over the month of August recorded 14 road users travelling at over 100 miles an hour in a stretch of road rated for 40 miles an hour. There is a need for careful coordination and more energetic coordination and cooperation between the council and the police enforcing speed limits on the major roads to bring down the number of deaths and serious injuries in our area. And speed watch isn't a measure of success in that area.
I don't disagree with you. The Community Safety Partnership, I think, has got a subgroup working on this with the police, looking at those specific issues. But this is what we have here is a snapshot of the entire county. What you're talking about are specific issues on specific roads that need to be being fed in through local police, through area boards. Certainly my area board gets frequent reports about the details of speed on very specific roads and actions that are being taken to address that. So I don't disagree with you, apart from the fact I don't think the place for that is in the overview of performance for the entire county. I think the place for that is on a more local level where you've got local problems, where you can take specific action to solve those issues.
We're not going to agree then. I think at a high level, you should be rating year on year performance of this county in driving down the number of deaths and serious injuries on Wiltshire's roads. At the high level, there's the place for a bar chart on that. If I may move on, I'm sorry that Nick Holder isn't here today. I've made this point before, and let me try to bring it forward in another way. If you turn to the last horizontal bar on page 117, he talks about the percentage of roads scheduled for treatment that have been resurfaced. I've made the point before that this seems to me to be a matter of marking your own homework. The one measure that matters to the people we represent is whether the state of the roads is improving or not. Now, my colleague tells me that here in the north of the county, there is evidence of work going on to improve the roads. Walking around in the Donheads over the last weekend, I have to tell you, the roads are in a worse state now than they were a year ago. So if you want to demonstrate that the scheduled roads, the scheduling for work to be carried out, has been implemented as planned, we need to have seen that schedule in advance. We need to see a supplement to this report, a detailed annex, which allows the people living in the county to say, yes, that work was carried out. Nothing has been carried out in my area of the county that would allow me to say, yes, I can agree with this upward pointing blue arrow. If you want to produce a report of this kind next year, publish now, show me now the list of work that is planned to be done in the year 2024-25 and put a timetable on it. And then when the time comes, you'll be able to claim, we will be able to score with you what's been done and what has not been done. Nothing's yet been, I have not seen any progress in my area of the county.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull up some data because, as you say, Councillor Holder isn't here and would have it no doubt to hand. Firstly, again, I come back to the point, this is about the overall progress from a county perspective, not about the kind of granular issue about what's happening in one small corner of the county. It's about the whole. If you want that level of granularity, again, Environment Select would be the appropriate place to look in detail at what's going on. Your comments about South West Wiltshire, though, certainly doesn't chime with me in terms of both the comments I'm receiving or the funding that's going in. My understanding is that South West Wiltshire this year is having 3.3 million spent. No, that might be, no, sorry, that's the overall. But its spend was, when looking at all the area boards, was significantly above the average that area boards were getting. So sorry, this year I think it's 440,000. But there is data there. I would suggest take it up with Nick, or take it up with Environment Select, because from a cabinet perspective, we are looking at, is our road surfacing programme across the county on track? Is it delivering? In this case, it's more than delivering, it's ahead of delivery. That's the broad picture that this monitoring report is designed to look at.
I go back to my first sentence again. What the residents of Wiltshire want to see is improved roads. This isn't a measure of improvement of the roads. This is a measure of whether or not you've achieved a particular schedule of work. And the roads in the southwest area of the county are in an appalling state, and they are worse now than they were a year ago.
I absolutely disagree with that point. Certainly my experience driving around the county is that the roads across the county are in a better state. The fact that we have an additional £10 million going in, £10 million, which I would note the Lib Dems voted against at the last budget, means that there is significant improvement going into the roads across the county. And I think, yeah, I think, again, we'll agree to differ on that.
Across the county doesn't cover the southwest, clearly.
The data says that you are getting more spent in the southwest this year and last year than most of the other areas of the county, because it's done based on the need. We're not going to fix all the roads everywhere at once, but we have long-term investment programs, which, as I've said, your party decided to vote against at the budget. Right, we'll definitely agree to differ on that one. Okay, does anyone else have any comments here? In which case, the proposals that we have are that we note the report. Do I have a seconder? All in favour? Thank you. We've now got the climate emergency. This can be quite a long topic. Should we take our 5-minute break now, as we're closing on 2 hours in? So 5-minute break, and then we will reconvene. We've had our 5 minutes, so if everyone could sort of take their seats, please, we'll get cracking in a second. Okay, are we back live? Not quite. Excellent. So we're back live. The next item, agenda item 9, is an update on the Council's response to the climate emergency. Dom, over to you.
Thank you. So the item that I'll introduce today has its roots in a decision taken back in February 2019, when full council acknowledged that we're facing a climate emergency and agreed to seek to make the county of Wiltshire carbon neutral by 2030. And Cabinet subsequently committed to make the council itself carbon neutral by the same date and agreed periodic in-progress updates to Cabinet. So this annual report is the 9th progress update to be presented to Cabinet since 2019. And for those paying attention and confused as to how we can have 9 annual reports in the space of 5 years, is because they were delivered at 6-month intervals. So the report in your pack, which starts on page 133, outlines how significant progress is being made against each of the climate strategy delivery themes. Appendix 1 provides an overview of performance and examples of delivery, and it's intended to be more accessible to a wider audience. And then Appendix 2 sets out performance against the climate-related key performance indicators. The Council's climate strategy plan, which is 2022 to 24, and the carbon neutral council plan for the same period will be completed by the end of this year. And that will provide full analysis of the progress that's made and the direction of travel for 2025 and beyond. It's important to state that this paper is for Cabinet to note. It doesn't require a decision to be made. It provides a summary of activity underway ahead of the new climate delivery plan, which will come to Cabinet in December. So the report in your pack is detailed. It covers the incredibly broad array of projects that we're undertaking across the council with external partners and suppliers and alongside other authorities and organisations to achieve our objectives. And I'm sure you've all reviewed the reports, but for anyone in the room or watching online who hasn't had the chance, the vast spectrum of projects are listed over 13 pages. So I won't go through the full list, but I did want to give you a bit of a flavour. Tackling the localised impacts of climate change on our communities, such as flooding, working with schools, both to install solar, but also to improve education on climate matters. Facilitating national schemes such as the Home Upgrade Grant, so that we can bring housing in Wiltshire up to a more efficient standard for families on low incomes. Promoting residential solar and battery installations. Forming nature partnerships with external stakeholders. Council property decarbonisation, tree planting, improvements to waste contracts, and the growth extension of our EV fleet. So the work coming out of the climate environment teams is astounding. And I'd really like to take the opportunity just to thank officers across the council who are involved for their effort and dedication. So where are we? I'm pleased to say that the council remains on track to deliver its goal to be carbon neutral as an organisation by 2030. Our direct operational greenhouse gas emissions reduced by 22% over the last year alone. More broadly, the latest data for county-wide emissions shows that these are reducing, but not at the pace that will deliver our more ambitious aspiration to become carbon neutral as a county by 2030. And that's become a common theme across the UK, where many other authorities who also set such an ambitious target are also not on track to meet it. So it's not unique to Wiltshire. However, we continue to refine and increase our focus on activities that help support Wiltshire residents and businesses to reach net zero. It's really important to recognise that as an authority, considering the large number of buildings, homes, fleet that we operate, we only have direct control over 0.2% of Wiltshire's emissions. So just as we can't solve a global climate issue in Wiltshire alone, as a community, we need to work together to tackle that and to reach net zero. This is not something that any local authority can do independently. It needs community buy-in. Also important, this is not a race either. So we're not frantically running around rolling out policies which are purely climate driven just in order to say that we're the first authority to do X, Y, or Z. We've seen the unintended negative consequences of this around the country, and we need to work methodically. We need to base our decisions on the data, and we must take our Wiltshire residents with us. So as mentioned, our full achievements will be presented in the delivery plan at the end of the year, and that will also form the final outcomes and the progress for the next period. So in summary, a huge amount of fantastic work completed, a lot still underway. My thanks go to officers across the council, as well as to members of the Climate Emergency Task Group and Environment Select Committee for ongoing support and scrutiny.
Thank you, Dom. I'm not sure I've got anything more to add at this point. It's a pretty comprehensive report. Again, I'm not going to go through elements. Does anyone else have anything to add from Cabinet? Tamara?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I would just like to highlight paragraphs 34, 35 and 36, in particular, the transport-related ones, and to thank officers in the Transport Directorate for all of their work, in particular in the passenger transport area, and to highlight the Wiltshire Connect on-demand bus service. There's a bit of information in there in paragraph 36, which marks the 1-year anniversary. But as you may not know, if you've not seen all of the detailed communications, the Wiltshire Connect DRT service has been expanded from the 1st of September into more areas in the east of the county, providing that connectivity, enabling people to get to places, and including to Tidworth and to villages in the Kennet Valley. And I very much would like to see more of this going forward. Thank you.
I think we all would. We're just rather reliant on central government continuing to invest in it to make that happen, which we have to hope continues, because franchising is a great model for Manchester. For us, we need something that is more bespoke or more hub and spoke, which this is. Yes, I would agree. Anything else from Cabinet? If I then come on to Environment Select, do we have Jerry with us? No, in which case we've got the Vice Chair of Environment Select? No. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Well, firstly, congratulations to all those involved in some considerable achievements, which are presented in the document. We've again had this conversation before, some really, really positive moves forward. And certainly if we get to 2030 with a net zero position as an organisation, I think that would be enormous credit to everybody that's been involved in it. So I think that needs to be absolutely stated. I guess I've got just a couple of thoughts. I hadn't heard the 0.2% figure in terms of Wiltshire's, if you like, direct impact on producing, climate affecting gases, etc. But so my question, which I've asked before, and I know it's not an easy one to answer, is what more we can do given the array of partnerships we have with organisations. Thinking of our friends in the NHS, we'll come on to my favourite Quenga, the ICB shortly, but nonetheless, what more, and I accept, it takes two to tango, if you like, but what more do you think we can do to encourage, support, partner with the larger organisations? The NHS is an obvious example, I guess, some of our major businesses and so forth, which just takes us that little bit further on a county-wide basis, because clearly the contribution we're making is important on two levels. One, purely in terms of the sustainability, climate outcomes, but also in terms of providing a degree of positive messaging, providing leadership, I guess, around this whole subject across the county. So I'm interested in that. I suppose the other question I've got, which is floating around my mind in broad terms, is in terms of Stone Circle, for example, which will be in terms of building houses, is a high carbon using type of industry, whether it's the building of the houses or indeed, of course, the living in them rather. And so I'm just wondering very specifically what we're doing in order to ensure that those products that are being built at the moment contribute to our net zero rather than seek to reduce our net zero in a negative way, reduce our net zero position. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with the first question, which is working with businesses. It's a very good suggestion. It's something that we're undertaking. A good example would be the Solar Together programme, which is directed at individual households, but moving that towards the business environment. So making sure that we can retrofit solar and battery, for example, onto business premises. That seems like a really good space to start. And working within the business community, news travels fast, and as soon as one company embraces this and starts to carry out those installations, others will follow. So that's one area of focus. But I think actually where I really want to see focus is on residents. As I say, we have to take Wiltshire residents with us. Part of that will come from education. I'll work with schools to highlight the climate challenges that we've got. And you know, anyone that's a parent will know that this information comes home at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and you know, sows the seeds. That's really important, but also equipping the new generation. But also targeting residents with for example, we had a conference down in the atrium a few weeks back, which was brilliant. We had stakeholders from across council departments. We had Solar Together. We had various organisations that are there to inspire people to look at climate seriously. But what's really crucial is breaking it down from the climate catastrophe heading, which is daunting for any of us, to the simplicities of what can you do to make your home more efficient? What can you do to rely less on electricity from the grid? What can you do to what can you do with your garden waste? It's those small things which will actually have a direct impact for Wiltshire households, and will more quickly, in my opinion, bring them on board and help to drive that wave of change across Wiltshire. So that's the first thing. In terms of our council homes, I don't know if Cabinet colleagues want to jump in on fitment there. We put so much emphasis on retrofit for existing housing stock. It's really important that we're doing that with every new build that we do, every project, and I'm confident that is underway, and it has to be that there should be no building that goes up without without solar panels on, as a prime example, without good energy efficient insulation. It seems a suitable standard for us.
Just a couple of points to add, and then I don't know if Phil wants to come in, but in terms of the other public sector partners, we have the Public Service Board tomorrow, which is a regular meeting with public service partners across the piece, including the NHS. The ICB and the NHS are essentially the same thing, although maybe not, but yes, essentially the same thing. And one of the items on the agenda for tomorrow is an update, which I believe Sarah is giving us on progress so far from our perspective, but more importantly, then looking at progress from other partners' perspectives and what more can be done in terms of cross-learning. That sounds sort of flippant, but if you look at the work that Salisbury District Hospital carried out since the first time we presented this, must have been 3-4 years, maybe longer ago. They took it on board and have engaged significantly. Also, the Army, whilst there were programs already underway with the Army, the information that we presented to them, again, several years ago, they went away and did a lot of further work in terms of the super garrison footprint, in terms of what progress they could make. They've perhaps been a little hampered by the way in which they access capital funding, but again, they've got projects there with plans to make at least one of the garrisons in itself net zero, which from a military footprint is actually quite a serious undertaking. And work is underway on that. So there's an awful lot of work that's going on with our partners as well, behind the scenes and constantly. Far too much to honestly be reporting on a frequent basis, but just to reassure you that those conversations are happening, and they're part of our sort of business as normal with partner organisations. Did you want to come in on housing, and then I may come back in? But
yeah, just really quickly then. It was just to say that obviously within the HRA we've discussed the net zero ambition a lot, and we know that we're building houses, the new properties that we are developing within the HRA. Some of those now are coming in at EPCA rating. We are working to retrofit the remainder of our stock to EPC-B, and that's obviously an ongoing piece of work. Some of that work is quite invasive, which means it needs to be done during the void process, and of course you're bringing in new heating systems and so on. So all of that work is going on, and it is built into the business plan, so that's taking place. Like I said, we've also got the new development programme. We've got MMC properties that we are developing and bringing in, and we've got a few of those now that are coming onto the market, and they do have reduced carbon emissions, of course, during the construction phase because it's taking place off-site. So that is helping to reduce carbon. Of course, we have to balance that with the need to get the houses built. And I think you mentioned Stone Circle. Interestingly, Stone Circle, in terms of development, is, because there's several parts to that, the development itself of the housing is something that's yet to really take hold. When we look at the housing company as such, it has a great many homes, but most of these have been acquired. So that construction has already taken place elsewhere, and to a certain extent is outside of our control. And a lot of the homes that do get acquired through the HRA and certainly by other developers is coming on 106 agreements. So again, they're being built by other parties. So in short, we are moving in that direction. There's a lot of work going into it. It continues to be a big driving force for us. But I think from a personal level, you have to, of course, bear in mind that this is an important balancing act. Ideally, we'd have everything being produced to a zero carbon standard, and that'd be great. But of course, we have a pressing need to deliver homes and to get people in those homes. So it's always a challenge of balancing those carbon emissions alongside the delivery of new homes and the costs and so on. But it's certainly something that we are working towards, and we're making great progress towards.
Thanks. And just on the local plan side, I mean, we have 2 or 3 tools that we can use to try and influence housing. One is the local plan. Assuming the local plan proposals are accepted by an inspector, they will effectively mean that all new housing in Wiltshire would have to be zero carbon. They will be subject to rigorous comment from developers, I have no doubt. If you look at a similar set of wording, other councils have been successful with it. However, there are councils where inspectors have rejected it as being overly onerous. So we will be in the hands of the inspector there. The evidence base is good, in my opinion. The evidence base of neighbouring authorities was agreed by inspectors. Viability is a complex factor there, and viability may have moved given the challenges that the construction industry has faced in terms of its costs. I don't know. We'll see. Providing full council agrees to get that to the inspector in October, we'll see what the inspector makes of it. But that's the simplest tool we've got. Otherwise, we're in the hands of building regulations, which, as I have said before, are pathetically out of date and shambolic, and desperately need updating. Although, I suppose if we wait another year, they'll have caught up by default to something close to zero, but not really zero carbon, but something closer to zero carbon. With regard to Stone Circle, you can probably give us more detailed knowledge there, having been a director on the company far more recently than I have been, in terms of the actions being taken. Whilst with council housing, we will say that all council housing we build will be built to a zero carbon standard. With Stone Circle, given the constraints on the development industry and the open market nature, we can't compel that. But certainly and I was last a director before I became leader, so many years ago, we were certainly discussing that from a Stone Circle perspective. I don't know how far or what progress has been made. I do know the construction industry has become a lot more challenging since then.
No, thank you for that, Richard. I don't know any more than you do, which is why I'm asking the question. And as the person that was, having been chosen as the first location for a Stone Circle development, which is obviously being built out at the moment, it was just an interest in terms of whether those particular 9 units are, I suspect they're not bluntly, but whether they are carbon neutral or not. Interestingly, talking about open market housing and the market more broadly, at the party conference, the Lib Dem party conference in Brighton, I suspect they'll be at all the party conferences, as one house builder which is now guaranteeing that in all their new builds, there will be no energy costs to the purchaser. I'm not going to say which house builder this is, but I'm not here to promote them, but for the first 5, potentially first 10 years. So there are some, what I would judge as enlightened house builders that are apparently getting it, and if they can do it, and we're talking about fairly high volumes, so we're not talking about the odd house here, we're talking about hundreds of units in certain locations, and mixed units, not necessarily very expensive properties. So I think there's an opportunity there. Coming back to your point about engaging people, I think is a really, really good point. And I wonder what, looking at Laura now, actually, in terms of the communication, sorry, Laura, in terms of communications through our schools, because I'm fed up picking non-recyclables out of my recycling bin, put in there by my teenage kids. So they may well have got the message when they were 6 or 7. They've certainly lost the message now. We may come on to discussions about waste management in a little bit. But it does seem to me that when I say we, I mean very much the collective we need to redouble our efforts, both in terms of reaching young people who, of course, in theory, it's the old Jesuit thing, isn't it? I think once you've captured somebody at 12, they'll be with you forever, in theory. So I think there's a lot more that we need to encourage schools to do, as well as reaching the wider public. And as much as I love the numerous press releases on the people that are being fined for fly tipping, I look forward to those press releases that come onto our email. It would be great, and I'm sure they do to some extent, to shift some of the activity in our comms team around some of these issues, because I think there is a significant reach. I think quite rightly, Wiltshire has a significant credibility, and here is a fantastic avenue that we ought to, frankly, be making more use of. Thank you.
A couple of points. Firstly, I was concerned you were asking us to solve a problem with bone idleness in teenagers, which is well out of our remit. It is. But your point on comms is absolutely spot on. We actually sat down with officers in comms about a month ago to do exactly that, highlight the key areas that we want to push across, the good news stories, and make sure that gets out there.
And I think on schools, I mean, we have a weekly newsletter. We can add it into our weekly newsletter saying that these sort of things. But I think also you need to look at school estate as well, and academies and academy chains, and what are they doing for their buildings, not just the pupils and the staff inside. And I think this is what Dom's point is. You know, we as a council can do what we can do, but we need to influence and encourage others to come with us.
I was just going to add one last point on that teenager or slightly older adult. I was at the UK 100 with the councillor training weekend, not last weekend, the weekend before. They're all blurring together, and was discussing that over dinner with a number of other council leaders and cabinet members who were all raising, and I didn't mention my children, who equally have slid back a little on their ability to recycle beyond the teenage years now. But it seems to be a consistent issue, I'm afraid. And so if anyone has a solution as to how to explain to late teens and early 20-somethings that they used to be really keen on recycling and used to bully me over it, and now they're the ones needing bullying, I'd be very grateful to understand how to make that work, because none of us across a wide range of authorities had a good answer to it.
Just a quickie, and slightly segueing into the issue of fuel poverty, but it's the only excuse I've got for raising this, and that is back to our comms team. Given the issue of the winter, so I'm going slightly off piece, so Richard, forgive me for this, but while I'm here, in terms of the winter fuel allowance, and the fact that so many people probably would be entitled to it if they apply. I'm not looking at you, but there's no reason to be looking at you at all. In terms of the winter fuel allowance, given that so many people probably are entitled to it but have never been claimed, again, I sort of speak into the ether at this point. If whoever around this table looks after our comms team, if we could, again, I love all the fly tipping stuff, but if we could do a lot more around encouraging more people to apply, there may be more pensioners in the winter that are in a slightly more comfortable position. So it's not relevant here, but I couldn't think of any better way of putting it in. So there you go.
We're on it. There are about somewhere around 1,000 households who ought to be claiming who are not. So we know who they are. We know how to target them. That work is underway. what worries me, being blunt, and perhaps we'll come on to this in another setting, I don't want to prolong today, is the significantly larger number of pensioners who are just above that level but will not qualify. And I think that what is being done here is an error. But hey, let's come on to that one later. Back to the topic in hand. Did anyone else have it? Oh, sorry, Andrew, you'd had a question on this. You'd sort of asked a supplementary. Did you want to come back in on any of it?
It's fine, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Did anyone else want to raise issues? Yes, please.
So the first thing to say is I'm delighted to see this as a restatement of our commitment to achieve net zero, and I'm looking forward to the new climate delivery plan that's due for completion later this year. But I want to draw your attention, please, to paragraph 25, firstly, and the issue of Scope 3 emissions. And I note that the Council continues to work with key suppliers towards measuring and reducing its indirect emissions. As you will know, Council, I raised at the Environment Select Committee the question of Scope 3 emissions arising from the incineration of our waste at the Lakeside plant and via the MBT plant in Germany and Holland. And at that time, the Director of the Environment said that work was still ongoing. I first asked the question about emissions from incineration at a meeting of Cabinet this time a year ago, and I was told subsequently that work was going on with RAP to try to define what they are, find out what they are. And I was surprised at the Environment Select Committee to be told that that work had not reached any conclusion and was going to take another year before you reached a conclusion. If I turn to paragraph 62, I see that you're planning to increase the amount that is sent to incineration as a result of shredding some of the material from household recycling centres, and that you think that this is going to save 5,965 tonnes of CO2 equivalents annually. How you can tell that without knowing what the resulting emissions are going to be from Scope 3, from burning that material, is difficult for me to tell. After the Environment Select Committee meeting, I went away to do my own research. And the fact is that the Environment Agency put out fairly recently, in July of this year, detailed reports. It put into the public domain monitoring reports for all the incineration plants in the UK, including the Lakeside plant. And from the 2022 report of the Lakeside plant, I can tell the Cabinet that that plant emitted in 2022 447,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide at a rate of 1.05 kilos, 1.05 tonnes per tonne of waste burned. So the significance of that is that for the 50,000 tonnes or so of waste that we send to the Lakeside plant a year, over 50,000 tonnes of CO2 is being released. And furthermore, of course, I assume that the plants, if we assume that the plants in Holland and in Germany are operating very similar processes to the Lakeside plant, then we must assume that in total, the material that we send to Lakeside on the one hand and via the MBT process that Hills operate on the other hand to Germany and Holland, our Scope 3 emissions arising from incineration amount to well over 100,000 tonnes, dwarfing the emissions from other aspects of our waste collection, which you put at 47,000 tonnes. Furthermore, I also note from the finance report earlier this morning that the MBT contract is overspent by 200,000 because the Dutch and German authorities have increased environmental charges. And you will be aware, I know, that earlier this year there was a consultation process concerning the extension of the emissions trading scheme to cover incineration plants in the UK. Now, we don't know the outcome of that consultation process, and there's been a change of government since the consultation process started. But my assumption is that Ed Miliband will want to extend the emissions trading scheme to include incineration sooner rather than later. And it was originally forecast to come in 2008. If it comes in and emissions are traded at anything like the current price, that implies an increase to the cost of our lakeside contract of at least £2 million. And if it were to go up again to £100 a tonne, it would be £5 million. So there's significant cost implications too. My question, very simply, is this. Will I see all these matters properly and comprehensively dealt with in the plan that you're going to bring forward before the end of this year?
Well, I'll give you Sorry, I didn't have my mic on that. I'll give you very good odds that government won't have clarified some of the emissions trading schemes by then, so probably not, but I'll let Dom answer on the detail.
The issue is how Wiltshire is going to get out of a very costly programme.
You've asked your question.
Costly in terms
'You've
of
asked your question. I'll
and
let
prospectively in
Thank
terms
you.
of money.
You've
too.
asked your question. I'll ask Dom to answer.
Thank you. Yeah, so you preempted me. We're very reliant on central government here, but that aside, the report that will come back at the end of the year will deal with this. A lot of it will also be dealt with as part of the waste transformation project. Okay, Scope 3 is very much on our radar, and we said this at Environment Select. We are working with suppliers and third parties to assess what the impact is, and it is not an easy task. We gave an example there of Lakeside, fantastic. There are numerous external bodies that we're working with who find it more challenging to provide that data to us. But yes, it will come out in that report and in the waste transformation project. And I did want to highlight that we are making progress with Scope 3. We've just been shortlisted for the ED Net Zero Awards as a result of Scope 3 work that we're doing with Milestone, where we have gone to them and we have said, look, as part of the tendering process, we need to build net zero into this. How can you support us? And that collaboration with Milestone has pushed them to incorporate net zero targets into their operations, and as a result of that, we've been shortlisted for this award. So we are making good progress. We are, much as we said earlier, trying to take residents along with us with our ambitions. We're also trying to take suppliers with us, and that is why a critical part of this will come out in waste transformation. Again, as a result of those relationships and those contracts, we will be looking to meet our net zero targets.
Did you want to come
May
back?
I come back?
Please.
I compliment Milestone on the work they're doing, but that is in a different context. And the issue here is that we know that incinerating waste is producing a very high level of carbon emissions. And it seems to me that the strategy and direction of your policy is to push more material into incineration rather than less. Over time, you're going to need to pull the incineration down in order to reduce emissions. And it's a policy in that direction which I think we need to see and which I urge you to find a solution for.
It's not our policy to push more towards incineration. And it also comes back again to, and I sound like I'm repeating myself again and again, bringing residents with us. We also need to look at the source of this waste and getting residents to realise that they need to be recycling more.
Yeah, national policy and the Environment Act is very clearly pushing more towards recycling. The problem with this is existing contracts, the pace of change that comes from government, the requirements that come from government. So this isn't something that you can change instantly. It's something you've got to really carefully think through, because whatever we do now has got to work for the duration of contracts, and there's a huge amount of work and effort going on in the area. I would just urge against simplistic solutions to an incredibly complex picture that government's made more challenging, in my assessment, through the way in which it defines recycling targets or recycling tonnage, where a ton of compost is seen as the same benefit as a ton of aluminium, which from a carbon perspective is utter nonsense. I will let you go on really quickly then.
To which I would only say, I asked this question about incineration a year ago. I'm trying not to be impatient. We need to see some progress.
Which will be done through the process of the waste contract work that's going on at the moment, but it can't be rushed because it's part of a contract renewal process, and it's got to be. We've got to follow the right processes. That sounds really pathetic, but it's true. If we don't do it right, we're just subject to challenge. Please, I'll let you in on this. Yes.
I beg your pardon. Your very kind offer took me by surprise a minute ago. I have one quite short question, a very positive one. The background is that the environmental community in Dorset is working with businesses and the public sector to run a Dorset COP, Conference of the Parties, on Saturday, the 2nd of November. In Wiltshire Climate Alliance, we've been inspired to copy them and offer a Swindon and Wiltshire COP in spring 2025. My question is, and I know the answer because we've already had some preliminary talks behind the scenes, would Wiltshire Council be willing to come in with us, perhaps integrating it with its Climate and Environment Showcase, and make this as big and as wide an event as we can possibly make it?
In one word, absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor.
I have seen these local COPs before, and they've been variable. I think the emphasis has got to be on what it can then deliver or what it can achieve. The idea is great, but it's making sure it actually delivers something beyond the usual people turning up to have the usual conversation.
Absolutely, results oriented. Thanks for that good point.
Right, does anyone else want to come in here? In which case, we've got proposals to move, please. Which is
Simply to move. Thank you.
All in favour?
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, we then come to item 10, the Integrated Care Board Community Health Service procurement. I would, before Jane starts, just draw members' attention to the fact that there is a small piece in the agenda supplement on this topic as well. Jane, over to you.
Ah, yes, you've stolen my thunder, because my opening paragraph is that Agenda Supplement 1 also refers to this item. Specifically, there are two changes to draw your attention to. One is the reason for the proposal comment was not in the published main agenda. It's now included in the supplement. And also the published agenda report took as read, but was not explicit that the contract has to be signed. And this is now made clear in proposal 3. So, community health services in Wiltshire are currently provided by Wiltshire Health and Care and Medvivo through their Access to Care programme. Community health services are key to keeping people safe and well in Wiltshire, and they support our policy to help people remain independent. The contracts are funded by the ICB and the Better Care Fund. Better Care funding is managed as a pooled budget with spending agreed between the ICB and Wiltshire Council, the governance of which is defined by national guidelines, and it's supported by a Section 75 agreement. The ICB are in the process of tendering a Bain, Swindon and Wiltshire-wide community services health contract, which will start on 1st of April 2025 with a proposed length of 7 years plus potential to extend it for 2. The ICB's community health contract retender will have cost and service implications for Wiltshire Council, social care, and because of our involvement in management of the BCF. We have discussed this before at Cabinet, and in principle we agreed in July that we would commit £9,668,000 £1,776 of the BCF in 24-25 to the ICB Community Healthcare Services contract, and this proposal, this report today seeks approval to commit that number. As agreed in the July Cabinet, the Home First service currently operated by Wiltshire Health and Care will be removed from the ICB Community Health contract, care contract. So that produces the reduction of the original figure. It's reduced by £2,322,117, which does include the uplift for this financial year. Today, Cabinet is asked to formally approve the amended financial contribution to be committed from the BCF for the new Community Healthcare Services contract from the 1st of April 2025 until 31st of March 2032, with a possible further 2-year extension. The contribution of £9,668,776 includes the removal of the Home First service as stated above, plus the addition of of 310,000 for the new Wiltshire Health Care and InReach service. The proposals are on page 216 of the Cabinet papers.
Thank you. Does any Cabinet member have any comments they would like to make here? Thank you. We have, I mean, this is the third item that we've had on this. It is moving towards a conclusion from an ICB perspective in terms of procurement. We have been through this process. I think we have got some of what we want in terms of Home First. I think that I would say broadly content. I'm not going to go beyond broadly content with the rest of the direction of travel. I think this could be better, but I think the ICB is moving in the right direction with it. I think I'd be remiss not to make that point that there is more that can be done in the future in this space in terms of proper partnership working and the benefits that we can be getting out of this process. If I then move over to, do we have any comments from scrutiny on this? No. So Ian.
Yes, thank you, Richard. I was at the Cabinet when this was discussed last time. I thought it was an intriguing conversation. I think there were two issues that were causing some degree of concern. One was the process, the procurement process, that people seem to be nervous about, shall we say, and the other was the issue of whether the money was actually going to be spent in Wiltshire. And I presume that those two issues have now been resolved to our satisfaction.
Yes, I think we've certainly managed to resolve that the in Wiltshire spend will be, related directly to the funding that we put in. I think that's a basic demand that is right to ask of the ICB. It's people's money, and it deserves, the Wiltshire pound should be spent in Wiltshire. That, and I have had a briefing from the ICB officers who are running the procurement process, and they reassured me of its robustness.
Thank you very much.
I don't think I'd add anything there. Yes, we're getting there.
No, I sense that the mood of the meeting, so to speak. My other question, and it's, I'm just interested in terms of the delivery of this programme of activity. Who's actually in charge? In other words, who decides? Who's actually? You're about to commit, and you will commit the funds. So the funds are available, but who's actually running the programme? And I ask the question from a purely personal point of view, having experienced or not the delivery of care in the, I use the inverted commas, care in the community, and my own personal experience of being delayed in hospital because there were no services available in the community to deal with quite minor issues that I had, but which nobody in the community had any training for. So I suppose my question is twofold. One is who's in charge of the spend and what are they going to do with the money? And two, is part of this about better, because it's required, better training for healthcare professionals in the community in order to play more a part in trying to reduce the amount of time people are sitting in hospitals because they can't leave hospitals because they can't get the services or the particular support that they need. Thank you.
I would just briefly like to make a point before I pass on to Alison Elliott, but, you know, Wiltshire Council is responsible for the care. We're not responsible for health services. And this is one of these areas where I think it's probably quite difficult as an end user of services to identify exactly where that boundary is. But we have officers who are, I know, quite feisty and robust in
This is
This
partnership
aspect.
working. I wish there was some clarity about precise responsibility, but that's not the nature of partnership working. So, Alison, anything you want to add?
So I think in terms of who is in charge, the ICB is the contractor, if you like, of the community health services. We are a partner to that. Because we work in partnership, as the leader quite rightly said, but also because we are, if you agree today, we are contributing a significant amount of resource from the BCF. So we are in partnership with the ICB, but the ICB is the main contractor of this of the community health services that will be across BSW. But in terms of one of the reasons why we very much wanted to bring Home First out of the contract and into reablement was to ensure that we had the right capacity and the right training to support Wiltshire residents being discharged from hospital. So that was one of the key motivations for keeping that service. So that service will come into the council from April 25.
Just one other quick one, if I may, because I don't want to take up, we could talk all day about this, and I'm going to try and get to the ICB board meeting on, I think on Thursday, where I'm going to sit very quietly in the background and try and take notes. So again, I'm sorry to try and seek clarity, because clearly that's not how the system seems to work. So if I were to characterise the relationship as we're the client, we're paying for their contract, they are the contract manager. Is that a fair enough? No, it's not, is it? Is that a fair enough? No. Nothing straightforward. I find there are no straight lines in any of this.
So we are not the client, we are a co-commissioner.
Okay, so, and again, I don't want to drag this on any further. In terms of outcomes, who is managing, who is judging the performance of the contract then?
So that will be led by the ICB.
So are they marking their own homework, to use a phrase we heard earlier?
Well, they're not providing the service, so they've gone out to procurement
Right.
to provide a service, and we will know fairly soon who that provider is. They are then responsible for contract managing that provider.
Yeah.
We obviously will have a view and we will contribute to that process as co-commissioners in this process. But it does become a bit more complicated then, because we are the client in terms of Home First that we're bringing in-house. So we are the client there. But from our point of view, from the main point of view, we are co-commissioners.
I'm not going to drag this out any longer, because we could drag it out forever. So I'm going to end it there, but thank you very much. And
I'm happy to have a conversation outside.
Bear in mind, we're talking NHS speak now, so you probably need a dictionary. I'd get a course as well. We could theoretically say no to this, but I'm not sure where that would leave us in terms of our ability to carry out partnership working with the NHS as a key body that we need to work with, particularly around some adult social care issues. So there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of negotiation. We're at a point now where I am comfortable, not completely, but comfortable with the direction of travel. We've discussed that, Cabinet are comfortable with it. So, yeah. It's now over to the ICB in terms of implementation. Enjoy the meeting on Thursday. I'm afraid I won't be there. I have to go and meet with the Housing Minister on behalf of the County Council Network, so I'm in London. But you don't say no to meetings with ministers. They are far too rare. But do let me know what happens, because it would be good to yes.
let me in.
Oh, they will let you in. It's a public meeting. You'll be into the first part. You won't be in for the second part. But it's reading through the agenda. Yeah, there's a fair amount on. Right. Anyone else wish to comment on this item? No. So we then, you've pretty much run through the recommendations already. So if you move them.
Yes, can I move the recommendations as on page 216 of the agenda?
Great, and there's no change to the recommendations in the appendix, just to check. I don't think there was.
No,
It was just
they're
the
too-
exec,
too
it was the exec
technical.
summary it changed,
Yeah,
yeah. Fine, I'll second that. All in favour? Great, thank you. We then move on to agenda item 11, family group conferences. Laura.
Thank you. I will keep it brief because it's been a long meeting. But for those who don't know, a family group conference, I just Googled it because I thought I'd be clever like that, is a family-led decision-making process in which the family and friends network come together to make a plan for a child. And it's a system whereby families who perhaps are have a child who might be becoming a child on a child protection plan or a child in need. That can be a very vulnerable time for that family and feel quite overwhelming. And the family group conference system enables a group to come together just to have a moderated chat to say, well, what's the plan for this child and how can we help families to get through the process. And we have commissioned Daybreak to do this for over 12 years. And I think when I read through the report, that the point that really jumps up for me is we know that children whose families have been referred to the family group conference are significantly less likely to go into care. And to Wiltshire Council's, and which in my particular obsession about early intervention and getting in to help families early, to me, this is just part of the bread and butter of what we should be doing. So in the past, as I said, it's been commissioned out. We did look at whether we should bring the service in-house, but having looked at that, we've decided that it's best for us to go out to recommission it. And so I'm going to keep it very simple. The proposals are on page 227, that we approve a budget of 900,000 over the next 5 years for the delivery of family group family group conferences. Will be initially offered for 3 years with a possible 2-year extension. We approve that the family group conferences is commissioned externally through an open procurement from the 1st of April next year. And to delegate authority to the Director of Commissioning and Corporate Director responsible for people in conjunction with the lead member for Children's Services. And so, yes, the current contract comes up for renewal for next year. So this is just the start of that process. And I hope everyone gives it their full support.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. From Cabinet, any comments? I mean, it'll make sense to me. Yep. John, from a scrutiny point of view.
Yes, good morning to you, Richard. Good morning, Laura. I'm very grateful to Lucy-Anne Bryant and Alison Elliott, who gave us a briefing on this topic. I'm delighted to say, pleased to say that we were very much in favour of maintaining a provision service from outside of the council. The process seems like an extremely effective measure for the child, and as a preventative measure, certainly much less costly than the child ending up in care. And actually, it's not just about pound coins, of course, because it's also far, far better for the child to remain with family and in their local environment than to end up in the care of the council. And we also thought this was actually a really good example of early help, where the outcomes can be measured. Because we do know how many young people go into the scheme and the impact on coming in, and quite often early help is very difficult to measure its impact of. Just one comment we did have, which came out of the conversation with officers, not a critique in any way, shape or form of the scheme, but we were slightly surprised at some of the challenges there are in producing reports from our data system, particularly Liquid Logic, in terms of tracking young people who have gone through this project. So there's perhaps a piece of work we could look at on that just to improve our own internal reporting. Very lastly, and I think importantly, I'm really pleased we're looking at continuing to place this particular piece of work out of house, because it's I think it's really important that that independence from the council is tangible and obvious to those involved, so they don't feel that this is the council doing two, but actually an organisation working with the families.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that impartiality that really helps families, because there's this sense that, as you say, the council are out to get them. We never are. But I think it's very important to be impartial in this, so that they know they're being enabled to. What we're trying to do, as ever, is to keep families together and to give them the right support to do that. And I think the other thing that's brilliant about this is it involves the child where appropriate, so it gives them some agency as well in that, which I think is really important.
Thank you. Ian, over to you.
Richard, nothing to add at all. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else with any comments? In which case, if you move the proposals, please.
Yeah, happy to move the proposals on page 227.
Thank you. I'll second that. All in favour? Thank you very much. We then have agenda item 12, SEND, AP and Inclusion Strategy. Jane.
Thank you very much. This to me is a much more joyful item to bring to Cabinet today than the previous one, which was very technical. The purpose of this report is to note the progress and achievements of the previous SEND strategy, which ended this year, and to then approve the SEND inclusion and alternative provision strategy from 2024 to 2029. It has an alternative name, which is Meeting Needs Together, Ambitious for All. Which I think sums up what we want to do. Wiltshire Council's business plan priority is, one of them is we get the best start in life, and it chimes with the Wiltshire Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy, which sets out the vision that people in Wiltshire are empowered to live full, healthy and enriched lives. Our ambition to achieve this vision rests on ensuring that children and young people get a good start in life, they can build resilience and they get the best from their educational opportunities, offering support to all young children, young people and families, as well as focusing on those who need the help most. It reduces inequalities and improves outcomes for all. We are committed to improving our services for children and young people with special educational needs and/or disabilities and their families. We believe that SEND is everybody's business, and we take a one council approach to it, and we are focused on providing excellent educational opportunities, including alternative provision for those who need it. I didn't mention it at the time because I didn't want to elongate the meeting, but you'll notice in the risk register that our outcomes for young people with SEND are better than the national averages already, but we won't rest on that. We'll continue to pursue improvements. This strategy has been produced in partnership with stakeholders, young people and their parents and carers, and the consultation process has taken a year to complete. The work represents a marked shift in our local areas. It is built upon the current lived experience and expertise of our children, young people and their parent carers as the driving force for change. The report is detailed, but it is good reading, so I commend it to you. If you haven't had the chance to read it yet, to read it in full. The strategy has 6 key priorities, which are underpinned with a clear implementation plan, with each area having a responsible lead, as well as oversight from the local area SEND and AP board. We have also committed to publishing a regular series of updates on the Wiltshire SEND local offer website. I really do want to make it important that the implementation plan, how this actually works, and scrutiny, John's gone now, I think, but scrutiny by... Oh, okay. Yeah, great. And scrutiny via Children's Select is essential to ensure things happen as they are intended to. I won't go through the 6 priorities individually. They're listed in the exec summary and discussed in the report. And although I'm excited about this, I didn't want to go on and on and on, so I'm trying to keep it short. They are all focused, pragmatic, positive, and they've been co-produced and signed off by key stakeholders. We've worked with the Parent Carer Council and particularly with a group of young people called Pioneers. Nathan Huntley, who's a young person with SEND, has contributed really valuable insights as part of our working team with Wiltshire Centre for Independent Living. So if I just kind of take a pause, and I want to give a big thumbs up to Nathan, if he's watching. Hello, Nathan. Thank you to you, all the pioneers and the Wiltshire parent carers Council and all the stakeholders who have taken part. We're not ceasing our consultation. I've just signed off a press release on continuing SEND conversations. The questions, I want my cabinet colleagues to satisfy themselves about are, whether you are assured that the strategy reflects the scope of intention regarding SEND inclusion and alternative provision, and whether you believe there's sufficient ambition in what we want to achieve. And is it clear to you how the strategy and the implementation will be monitored? I have mentioned there's some of the things in the speech, but we're only as good as our outcomes. The proposals are on page 242, but they're quite simple, so I will read them. We ask that Cabinet notes the key achievements of the 2020 to 2024 SEND and Inclusion Strategy, and that you will approve the SEND Inclusion and Alternative Provision Strategy 24-29, otherwise known as Meeting Needs Together, Ambitious for All. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got cabinet members wanting to come in, so Laura, then Ian.
Thank you, Jane. I'm very grateful for you summarising, because I was slightly dreading it had to be me. I was at the POB meeting last week, and Kai was there. And I always feel this, particularly with families with SEND, because we spend a lot of time with them. Suzanne Wickham does brilliant work with them as well, and we spend a lot of time with the Parent Carer Council. It's still so difficult for families, and the process is impenetrable. It's very, very hard. And that is always my challenge back to us as a team and officers, is we can put in brilliant strategies. We can even put in action plans, but will our families notice? Will an individual who realise they've got a concern with their child, and that child probably has SEND, will they get a quick, easy response that is simple for them to act upon and that will result in the right support for their child? And that will be the only question that I want answered, because for the human experience, it's very, very tough, and we know that. And if I would love it if I could just have occasionally meet them when I say, how's it going? They go, it's been brilliant. We've had so much easy support. It's been fantastic. And my child's in the right school and I'm really, really happy. I tend to meet those who have had a good experience. So for me, that remains the acid test. Is this going to, will our families notice, is what I normally say, because we can put in lots of strategies, but will our family notice? And it's not even a rhetorical question. It's just a statement that that's what we've got to go as our mantra. And the other point is that we know that safety valve is the biggest thing that affects this council, and getting it right is essential for our own financial survival. And so, again, I ask all our cabinet colleagues to say that, approving this is incredibly important, because we hope in here that all the strategies that we've got within the safety valve programme are embedded in here, and that it's going to make a significant difference. Because if we don't, and the number of EHCPs keep going up, that our schools are not as inclusive as they sometimes claim to be. If we don't get this right, this is not good for our councils. So thank you to all the officers who've worked on this, and for all, as you say, the fantastic young pioneers, particularly Nathan and his team, but all the Wiltshire Parent Carer Council members. It is fantastic, but we've got to deliver.
Thank you. Ian.
Thank you, Richard. Long meeting, I know, but allow me to reflect a little bit from my own area on this. And I'll start by thanking Ian over there for his effusive words earlier. But the point of it, I think you were looking at two reports, kind of financial outturns, risk, etc., some very high-level figures. What they don't show is what goes down at several levels, and that's what I want to highlight in here. And I was struck in reading this strategy on the priority 6, increased skills, greater independence, greater opportunities in life, and that other statement that Jane emphasised there, everybody's business, focus on educational opportunity. And so in thinking about in my own areas, what does that mean? Well, we're not the classroom, we're not the family, but we are a big part of the community in terms of leisure centres, libraries, and I'll include the history centre slightly in this, and communities, area boards, etc. Not many hours ago, I asked each of my areas through David Redfern, could I just have some examples, please, of what we are doing in this? I'm going to spare you because actually it was an avalanche of all the things that were going on in all of those leisure centres and all of those. I'll highlight some, for example, in leisure centres, we address the kind of physical aspects of potential exclusion, be it, the pool access, be it changing rooms, etc. But also very much the activity that people face in this, that are those activities tuned to them and provided for them? And yes, they are. Even down into the fuel programme in the summer, we ran separate camps that specialised in that area. So we're very much tuned into that. What is in our libraries, the very material in our libraries, is it supportive? Does it give those answers? The activities in libraries, be it rhyme time, be it, yes, they are. From area boards, I'm told that the various projects have supported 229 young children with additional needs. So the point I'm trying to make is we're already doing a lot. We are working with you, and sorry, I lost my thread there. We are working with you, but that is not to be complacent. There is a great deal more we can be doing in all of this. And I think seeing this today is that prompt to say, okay, can we, you three sit down. I see Suzanne tucked away in the corner, who I know has been badgering us for the last 2 years about what are we doing in leisure centres, what are we doing in libraries. Well, perhaps we should have a little bit more of a reflection on that and put some more flesh on the bones of this. The second point I want to make before I finish is that when you start using words of strategy and programs, it all seems very top down. And actually, I want to kind of emphasize that every manager, every leisure centre, every librarian or whatever is open to suggestions and ideas and requests. So please don't feel everything has to come up through here and back down again. Please encourage people to engage with their local staff throughout all of this organisation. So I think I've probably said enough. I hope you got the message that we are supportive and want to be more so.
Thank you.
Can we just
Jane.
invite Catherine Davis up to?
By all means,
table?
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Davis, Director of Education and Skills. I just want to say thank you. It's really heartening to hear about kind of that everybody together message really being kind of lived across Wiltshire Council. And as part of the strategy, there's a really key part in there around workforce development. And Suzanne's been integral to some of the work, for example, that we've done around dyslexia-friendly schools. And we've got some new rollout of workforce development around autism education and neurodiversity in schools. And I think that join up that you've just described and everything that Jane has just explained really gives us our kind of next steps that are lived through that strategy around how we develop our workforce, not just in schools and settings, but across all of our communities.
Thank you. I think everything I was going to say has been said, so I won't say it again. That's fine. Safety valve, yeah.
John,
No, it's scrutiny. So, John, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chair. Yes. This was discussed at the Children's Select Committee on the 5th of September. Now, full disclosure, I was at an LDA event in London on that day, so I'm working from notes provided from that meeting. I think that there were 4 key bullets that have been fed back. There was a degree of uncertainty about what improvements were needed that the strategy would actually address. I suspect that will come out clearer in the action plans that follow. feedback from the committee was that more detail was needed to clarify what the strategy aims to achieve with some defined deliverables. A desire that the implementation plan will come to the committee, and then lastly, that the role for schools could be clearer. So that's the feedback from the committee. If I might just be permitted to make a couple of personal observations. First of all, is that everybody has been absolutely right when they've been talking about how this is a really important task for the council to address. Our EHCPs are still going in the wrong direction. And this is because there's still a perception of need for those out there, where that need is not always there. And I think that there's more work. And actually, I agree with something that Ian said just now, even Pippling said just now, although not in exactly the same way. When Ian, you talked about it shouldn't be top down, but it can be bottom up. It can be bottom up, but it can also be bottom up led by us as Wiltshire councillors, and as Wiltshire councillors going to the schools in our communities and talking to them and lobbying them in so much as what actions are they taking in terms of really integrating SEND into their schools and giving mainstream opportunities for young people within their environments. And we can look at some really easy statistics that come out from schools that help us understand whether the school is actually really looking to embed SEND and SEND young people within mainstream or not. You can look at the gaps in exclusions. You can look at the gaps in achievements and all the rest of it. And where there are smaller gaps, there are, on the whole, schools that are more engaging. You know, I think there's a role for every single one of us as councillors to play to really make these strategies work. And I'm someone who normally will give quite a hard time to you as the administrator and say, yeah, here's another strategy, lovely words, what are we going to do to turn this strategy into action? And that is there to an extent. But what I'm actually giving the challenge to you, Laura, and to you, Richard, is tell us as local members what we can be doing in our communities, tell us what we can be doing with our local schools, with organisation in our areas, to really encourage this, because until we move away from the best way to support SEND young people is to put them into an SEND environment attitude, we actually won't solve this problem. We'll just keep making it worse. The best place for most children with SEND is in their local community, is in their local school, is sitting there alongside their neighbours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Ian.
Thank you, Richard. I don't disagree with, I think, anything that anybody's said so far. This is an excellent piece of work. It touches back on the point about leadership, showing leadership. I spent a number of years working for MenCap many years ago, but nonetheless working with quite a large number of mostly younger people with learning disabilities, learning difficulties. And it seems to me that one of the challenges and one of the hallmarks of any decent society is that it does everything it can to involve people from whatever their backgrounds, and particularly people with disabilities and particularly people with SEND, whatever those challenges may be and whatever the hurdles may be. I think it's an absolute fundamental right that we all have to engage in our democracy, to engage in our facilities, libraries, leisure centres, and to play an equal part in the society that we all occupy. So I think it's an excellent piece of work. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Everything's been said. Congratulations on what you're achieving, and I look forward to seeing the strategy further developed and delivered. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from any other members? By all means, yeah.
Thank you. Just on Councillor Hubbard's point, really around the implementation plan that sits underneath the strategy and the commitment that the key performance indicators are really clearly set out as part of that implementation plan. So scrutiny around whether we're making a difference, and going back to Councillor May's point around whether families will feel the difference, will be integral to the monitoring of that implementation plan.
But I think, John, you make a good point about challenging us as local members as to what's going on in our local area. And we might think of a template or something, Catherine, of questions that councillors could be asking of their local schools or, you know, whatever facilities are in their area. It would be a good challenge.
That would be really good, Laura.
Jane.
Yes, and of course, local councillors can, through the area board, really support send and inclusive practices. You know, their grants do come in for, you know, discos. House of Love is a well-known and extremely popular one. So, you know, please, councillors, bear in mind how important it is to be inclusive when you're giving your grants.
Okay, thank you. So if everyone has finished, if we can move to proposals, please. Again, no need to read them all. We have.
Okay, well, there are only two, and I think I did read them out at the end,
You
but
did.
I need to put my glasses on. Sorry, I've got to a certain age. Proposals are on page 242, and they are that Cabinet note the key achievements of the 2020 to 2024 Send and Inclusion Strategy, and that we approve the Send, Inclusion and Alternative Provision Strategy for 2024 to 2029.
Thank you. So
I'm happy to
Laura will second that. All in favour? Thank you. Unless I am missing something, that brings us to the end of Cabinet today. Thank you all very much for coming along. I look forward to seeing you at the next exciting instalment in October.
Right, Sue.